People tell one another to be kind, on the grounds that one never knows when a kindness might be wanted back. But a kindness that waits to be repaid is not kindness at all. Real kindness is a pot of tea carried across a frozen yard before daylight, to a man who can give you nothing, who owns nothing but a mud-stained coat, and whom the whole house has agreed to rank somewhat below the horses whose stalls he mucks out. Clara Underhill had carried that teapot across that yard for 7 weeks. She expected nothing by it. She wanted 1 hour in the day when nobody said her name with an order attached to the end of it. 7 years ago, Clara had been the ward of an earl. Now she knelt to wax his floors, and her wages were docked for a teacup she had not broken. She did not know that the man on the corn bin who sat reading a book he could not read, who told her to come at the roan mare from the right, who had never once said where he came from, was counting down the days exactly as she was.
Staring directly at her.
Nor did she know that 250 miles south, in a room overlooking Threadneedle Street, a very courteous gentleman had drawn a ring round a date on his calendar, the 25th of March. After that day, Thornley would belong to nobody at Thornley. 90 days. And on the 6th of January, in a hall packed with half the county, everything Clara believed she understood about that house would come apart in a single breath, and she would be left holding the sharpest piece of it. Chapter 1. The clock in the stable tower had not yet struck 5 when Clara Underhill came down the back stairs with her boots in her hand. She carried them because the 4th step from the bottom had a voice like a trodden cat, and because Mrs. Barrowcliff slept badly and had a talent for waking at the sound of another person's mourning. Clara had learned the house the way a poacher learns a wood, which doors had to be lifted before they were pushed, and which passage held a draught that could snuff a candle at 10 paces. It was the 3rd week of December, and the cold had got into the fabric of the place, not the honest cold of outdoors, which a person can dress against, but the settled indoor cold of a house that has stopped being heated for anybody's comfort. The window at the turn of the stair had a fern of frost growing on the inside of the glass. Clara had watched it thicken all week and had begun, privately, to be fond of it. She sat on the bottom step and pulled her boots on. They were 3 winters old and cracked across the left toe, and she had stuffed the crack with a folded scrap of flannel, which worked until about 8 in the morning and then did not. 21 years old, and she moved like a woman of 50 in the first hour of the day, because the first hour was when the previous day was still in her knees. The kitchen was warmer. She raked the range, fed it, set the kettle to the plate, and stood a moment with both hands flat on the iron, taking the heat greedily, the way she took everything now. That was when she saw the letter. It lay on the scrubbed deal table where nothing was ever left, half out of its envelope, as though somebody had read it standing up and been called away. Mr. Colshaw's hand, she knew it from the estate books, a cramped, sloping, sweating sort of hand, the letters leaning into one another for support. Clara did not touch it. She only stood where she was, with her palms on the range, and let her eyes go where they went. And I must beg you to understand that the last day is the 25th of March, and that after the 25th there is nothing left to discuss with anyone upon any terms. Then a footstep somewhere above, and Clara turned to the kettle and did not look at the table again. She scalded the pot and measured the tea out with a care that would have made Mrs. Barrowcliff suspicious, because the tea in that tin was accounted for to the ounce, and Clara had been getting away with it since November by the simple method of drinking none herself in the afternoons. She wrapped the pot in a folded rag and hooked a tin cup over 2 fingers. Then she went out into the yard. The cold met her at the door like a hand laid flat against her face. The cobbles had a crust of frost on them, that broke under her heels with a small sound like sugar, and her breath went up in front of her and vanished. Above the roofline, the sky was still entirely black, with that hard, scoured blackness particular to Yorkshire in December. Behind her, Thornley Hall stood up out of the dark, a long, blind, ill-tempered pile of gritstone, 3 stories and 41 windows on the south front, not one of them lit. Ivy had the north face by the throat. It had been her home for 7 years, and she could no longer look at it without her shoulders doing something small and defensive. The stable lay across the yard and through the arch, and she walked fast, because standing still was worse than moving. She thought about the letter. The 25th of March was Lady Day, the day the rents came in and the hirings changed, and the year's accounts got themselves settled, and had done since before anybody's grandfather. Half the ledgers in England turned over on the 25th of March. After the 25th, there is nothing left to discuss with anyone upon any terms. Clara reached the stable door and set her shoulder to it, and as it gave, and the warm animal breath of the place came out to meet her, she was doing a sum she had no business doing and did not know the purpose of. 90 days. Chapter 2. Inside, it was another country. The stable held its heat the way the house never had, thick, close, brown-smelling, hay and leather, and the steaming bodies of the horses shifting in their stalls. One lantern hung low by the tack-room door, with its wick turned down to a thumbnail of flame, and by that light a man sat on the corn bin with his left leg straight out in front of him and a book open on his knee. "You're late," he said without looking up. "I'm 4 minutes late." 4 minutes on a morning like this is a great deal of time to a horse. "Then the horse may go and boil its own water," said Clara, and shut the door behind her with her hip. He laughed. It was a low, rough, rusted sound, as though the mechanism that produced it had stood out in the rain for a long time and was only lately being made to work again, and Clara had never quite got used to it. His name, as far as anybody at Thornley knew, was Nat Shaw. He had walked up the drive at the end of October with one pack on his shoulder and asked whether there was work in the stables, and there had been, because Wilf Tarn had answered Mrs. Barrowcliff back a fortnight earlier and been turned off without a character, and because nobody else in the parish wanted the north yards in winter. He slept in the loft above the tack room and took his meals alone, and the other servants found him unaccountable and left him to it, which appeared to suit him entirely. He was not a handsome man. He was too hard used for that. Tall, broad through the shoulder in a way that came from work and not from a tailor, dark hair grown too long, and a scar running pale from his left temple to the angle of his jaw, catching the lantern light whenever he turned his head. The left knee did not bend, so the leg came through stiff and swung wide. His eyes were the color the sky goes over the moor an hour before snow. He was, Clara supposed, 35. She had never asked. She set the pot down on the bench and unwrapped it, and he closed the book and put it aside. And it was only then, as it slipped, that she saw what it was. That isn't a book. It has pages. It's a survey book. She picked it up before she could think better of it. It was a field notebook of the ordinary sort, foolscap octavo, canvas-backed, the pages ruled in columns and filled edge to edge with the cramped, tidy figures of somebody who had spent his life out of doors with a chain and a level. "Where did you get this?" "Under a floorboard in the loft, with a great deal of mouse." "Do you know what it is?" "I know it isn't in English." He said it evenly. But there was something behind it, a small dryness, quickly covered. There are numbers, and there are pictures of numbers, and every so often somebody has drawn a comb. It isn't a comb, it's a tile drain. Clara turned the page towards the lantern. A run of pipe under the low field. These are levels, taken every chain, and this column is the fall a foot in 80 yards, which is not enough which is why that field floods every February and always has. She turned another page, and something went through her, sharp as a splinter. This is the Ravenset cut. He was 3 weeks on it. He caught cold on the top of that hill and never entirely lost it. The stable was quiet. One of the horses shifted its weight. "Who?" said Nat Shaw. "My father." Clara closed the book and set it down carefully, squaring it against the edge of the bench. "Edward Underhill. He surveyed for half the estates between here and Richmond drainage mostly, and levels for the mineral men. The old Earl had him here on and off for 6 years. She heard her own voice doing something she disliked and stopped it. He taught me to read them the way other fathers teach a girl the piano. He said it would be more use to me. He was right as it happens, though not in the way he meant. And he's dead. 7 years in June. My mother the same week. She poured the tea. Cholera. It came up the Calder Valley that summer, and it took 1,100 people in Wakefield, and 2 of them were mine. I was 14. The old Earl sent a carriage for me in August, and I have been here ever since, in one capacity or another." She held out the cup. "Drink that before it goes to ice." He took it. There was only the one cup. There had only ever been the one cup, and neither of them had ever proposed doing anything about it, and so they passed it between them the way they had done every morning since the 4th of November, without comment. It was a soldier's cup, tin, dented on one side, the handle brazed back on by somebody who had not much cared how it looked, with a regimental number stamped into the base and worn shallow by years of somebody's thumb. "You stole this from the Army," she had said that first week. "The Army stole a great deal more from me," he had said, and that had been the end of that. Now he drank and handed it back, and Clara wrapped both hands round it and felt the heat go up her wrists. "She has us doing the silver again today," she said. "All of it. For 12th night, all of it. Every piece. Because the county is coming, and because his lordship might arrive at any hour between now and Epiphany, and because Mrs. Barrowcliff would sooner be found dead than be found tarnished." Clara drank. The tea was too strong and slightly bitter and entirely wonderful. "Cordelia, no. Rosamond is being fitted again on Thursday. That will be the 3rd time in a fortnight. Silver blue to bring out her eyes. And does he know all this is being arranged for him? He knows nothing at all. That is rather the point of it." Something moved in his face and was gone before she could put a name to it. He got up off the corn bin. The leg took a moment to agree to it, as it always did, and took the pitchfork down from the wall, and Clara carried the cup with her down the range to look at the horses. Because it was the only part of her day she was not obliged to account for. At the last stall she put her hand up without thinking, and the roan mare came round at her out of the dark with her ears flat and her teeth bared, fast as a snake. Clara got her arm back. Her heart banged. "Left side," Nat said from up the range. He had not raised his voice, and he had not appeared to be watching. "She'll always go for you off the left. Come at her from the right, and she's a lamb." Clara looked at the mare. The mare looked back with one white-rimmed eye, entirely unrepentant. "How do you know that?" There was a pause. It was not a long 1/2 a second, perhaps. No more than a man takes to shift his grip on a pitchfork. But Clara had been living for 8 months in a house where she was obliged to notice everything, and she noticed it. "Because I've been mucking her out for 8 weeks, said Nat Shaw, "and I've been bitten." Chapter 3. The silver took 4 hours. It was laid out on green baize, the length of the servants' hall, the salvers, the epergne, the 24 candlesticks, the great ridiculous soup tureen, with a dent in the foot where the old Earl had once thrown it at a fox that got in through the gunroom window. Clara worked with rouge powder and a leather and a wet thumb, and by the second hour her hands had gone the dull red-brown of it to the wrist. and by the fourth she had stopped being able to feel the small of her back as a separate thing from the rest of her. Bess Yedan, 17, the kitchen maid, and the only person below stairs who still spoke to Clara as though she were a person, worked the other end of the table and kept up a commentary that required no answering. Clara let her hands do the work and let her mind go where it wanted, which was backwards. Cuthbert Ferrars, sixth of that name, 71 years old, white-whiskered, gouty, permanently smelling of pipe smoke and horse liniment, with a temper like a dropped tray and a heart that had gone out to a 14-year-old orphan on sight and never come back. He had never once said anything to her that could be written on a card. He had simply put her in the blue bedroom, sent for a governess, given her the run of the library, and, when she was 16 and had been caught adding up the laundry book for amusement, sat her down at the corner of his own desk with the steward's returns and said, "Check these against my figures, and don't come to me until you've found the 3 he's got wrong." There had been 4. He had been so pleased with her for finding the 4th that he had been rude to her about it for a week. On the morning of the 16th of March, his valet went in with the shaving water and found him dead in his bed with his spectacles still on, and everything Clara had believed to be solid turned to sand under her in the space of an hour. The trouble was not the will, the trouble was the entail. Thornley was settled land, tied up by a deed 3 generations old, and it went, whether anybody liked it or not, to the next male heir of the body, the old man's nephew. Nobody at Thornley had laid eyes on him in 12 years. He had grown up in the house from a boy, and at 19 he had quarreled with his uncle so comprehensively that the servants still spoke of it in the tone reserved for weather events, and had bought a commission and never come back. There had been letters at first, the housekeeper said, and then fewer, and then none. In September of '54 he had gone out to the Crimea, and after that there had been nothing at all, not to his uncle, not to the lawyers, not to anybody. The old Earl had never spoken his name in Clara's hearing, not once in 7 years. She had not even been sure of the Christian name until she saw it written in the solicitor's letter after the funeral. And so in April, with the heir presumed somewhere between Sevastopol and the grave, the estate had fallen to the nearest respectable relation willing to come, and Mrs. Augusta Barrowcliff had come, with 2 grown daughters and 11 trunks, 4 weeks after they put the old man in the ground. Then, in August, there had been a letter from London to say that the heir was found, alive, wounded, badly, by the sound of it. He had presented himself to Mr. Pike at Lincoln's Inn, and Mr. Pike was satisfied, and his lordship would come north to take possession when his health permitted. That had been the 22nd of August. It was now the middle of December. His health had not yet permitted, and Thornley had spent 4 months polishing itself for a man who did not come. Clara set down the candlestick she had been holding for some time without doing anything to it, and picked up the next one. In the afternoon she was sent to wax out the dining-room floor, which had not been used since March, and had accordingly to be brought up to a state in which 40 people could see themselves in it. She was 3 hours at it, on her knees, working backwards from the window, when the door opened at the far end and Rosamund Barrowcliff came in. Rosamund was 24 and genuinely beautiful, in the manner of something carved rather than grown. She had come in out of the wet park with her skirts 3 inches deep in mud at the hem, and she walked the whole length of the waxed floor without hurrying, dragging that hem behind her like a plow, and out through the door at the other end. Clara sat back on her heels and looked at the long brown smear. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would not cost more than it bought. She got the cloth and began again from the window. At the end of 8 minutes, the door opened at the far end, and Rosamund Barrowcliff came back the other way. Chapter 4. To understand Mrs. Barrowcliff, Clara had come to think one had to stop looking for cruelty and start looking for arithmetic. The woman never raised her voice. In 8 months, Clara had not once heard her shout. She did not slap, or throw, or sulk, or make scenes at dinner. She was 47 years old, small, upright, dressed always in the same 3 good black gowns turned and returned. And she moved through the house like a bailiff going round a farm he means to buy at a discount. She counted the candles. Every Saturday evening after prayers, she went into the chandlery with a slate and counted them, the wax, the composites, the tallow, and wrote the figure down. And the following Saturday counted again and wrote down the difference. Clara had seen the slate. There were 51 weeks of figures on it. She did the same with the tea, the sugar, the coals, the soap, and the servants. There had been 19 staff at Thornley in March. There were 11 now. Old Headley, steward for 22 years, had gone in May, turned off without a character after one question too many about the timber. Wilf Tarn had gone in October. The rest had gone quietly, one at a time, on Saturdays, so that the house never had more than one shockin' in it at once. And Clara Underhill, who had no title, no fortune, no relation living, and no protector on this earth, had been reclassified in the 4th week of April. There had been no scene about that either. Mrs. Barrowcliff had merely observed, over the breakfast table, that as dear Clara was not in fact any relation of the family, and as the estate's circumstances were what they were, it would be more comfortable for everybody if she made herself useful. Nobody had said the word servant. Nobody had needed to. Clara had simply found her things moved to the attic that afternoon, and a list of duties on the bed, and a badly fitting gown of gray wool folded on top of it. The only irregularity in the whole machine was Tuesday. On Tuesday, the post came up from Leyburn at about 11. And on Tuesday, not every Tuesday, but often enough that Clara had begun to keep count of it in the same part of her mind that kept count of everything else. Now Mrs. Barrowcliff took her letters into the small parlor and turned the key. Clara had passed the door twice while it was locked. The first time there had been nothing to hear. The second time there had been a chair moved, once hard, as though somebody had stood up too fast. That evening she was sent for. The small parlor smelled of the fire and of the particular cold tea smell that the house had in the evenings now. Mrs. Barrowcliff sat at the writing table with the household book open in front of her and a pen in her hand. And she did not look up when Clara came in, and she did not ask her to sit. "The Wedgwood cup," she said. "Ma'am. The one that was broken on Thursday in the still-room passage. 4 shillings and 6pence, and it cannot be matched. So in point of fact it is more, but I shall say 4 and 6. She wrote it down. "Against your wages." Clara stood with her hands at her sides. She might have said, "Miss Selina took it off the shelf to look at the mark on the bottom, and dropped it, and laughed. And 3 of us saw her do it." She might have added that her wages were £8 a year, of which she had received 1/4 in June. What she said was, "Yes, ma'am. You will find," said Mrs. Barrowcliff, still writing, "that things go on more smoothly when they are written down." Clara was at the door when the other one spoke. Selina Barrowcliff was 20, less handsome than her sister, and knew it, and had made up the difference with a mouth that could take the skin off a person at 9 feet. She had been sitting in the window seat with a book she had not turned a page of. "Don't look so martyred, Underhill," she said. "It doesn't suit you, and it can't be worn out of doors." "Selina, I'm being kind. She thinks there's a great gulf fixed us up here, her down there." Selina turned a page at last, without reading it. "There isn't. We're all of us living in another man's house, on another man's money, waiting to see whether we'll be let stay. The only difference is that she knows she's doing it." The pen stopped. For a moment, nobody in the room said anything at all, and Clara, standing in the doorway with her red-brown hands hanging at her sides, understood with a small cold shock that of the three people present, the only one who had gone white was Mrs. Barrowcliff. "Go to bed, Clara," said Mrs. Barrowcliff. Clara went. Chapter 5. These are the things the groom did in the last weeks of December, in the order in which he did them. On the Monday, 4 minutes after Clara Underhill had gone back across the yard with an empty pot, he stood in the stable arch, looking at the kitchen door. Then he went to the coal store, which was not his business, took 11 lumps, carried them round by the laundry passage, and put them in the bottom of the scuttle outside the still room, with the smaller pieces on top, so that the level did not appear to have changed. Then he went back and forked out 3 stalls. On the Tuesday, he was at the top of the drive when the Leyburn carrier came up with the post and 2 crates of Rhenish wine, and while they were both bent over them, he said something short, and the carrier laughed, and 6pence went into his hand. 1 crate went up to the house. The other went back to Leyburn, was recorded as undelivered, and stayed there 11 days. On the Tuesday night, between 1 and 2 in the morning, he came down out of the loft with his boots off, crossed the yard, and went in at the door of the north passage, which did not lock. He worked at the estate office door for 40 minutes with a length of flat steel, cut and filed. Then he stopped and stood quite still with his hand on the door, and went away again. On the Wednesday and the Thursday he did the same, and on the Thursday he took the plate off the lock and looked at the works, and screwed it back on, and did not try it again. On the Saturday the post brought him a letter. It had come to the receiving house at Leyburn, addressed to N. Shaw to be called for, and he had walked 6 miles down and 6 back for it, on a bad leg, in weather. He read it in the loft with the storm lantern on the floor between his feet, 3 times over, then folded it once, and put it into the lantern through the top, and stood watching while the flame took it. It burned from the outside in, the way folded paper does. When it had finished, he tipped the ash out onto the boards, and looked at what was left. There was 1 fragment, perhaps an inch across, browned at the edge, carrying the ends of 2 lines. The first said nothing at all. The second said, "Has been recognized." He sat down on the floor of the loft with his back to the wall and his bad leg out in front of him, and stayed there a long time while the lantern burned down and the horses moved below him. On the Sunday morning at 10 minutes to 5 he was up, and had the pitchfork in his hands before the girl came across the yard. And when she opened the door he said that she was late, and she said something rude, and he laughed. Chapter 6. The coal was found on the Monday. Mrs. Barrowcliff found it herself, because she looked in the scuttles on Mondays as she looked at the candles on Saturdays, and because 11 lumps is a great deal of coal to a woman who has taught herself to see it by the piece. She stood in the still room passage, with the scuttle tipped towards the light, and counted, and then straightened up and said, in the level voice she never departed from, "Fetch Underhill." There was no shouting. There never was. "I do not accuse you of taking it," she said, when Clara stood in front of her with her hands still wet from the sink. "I accuse you of being the only person in this house with a reason to want it. You are cold. Cold makes people ingenious." She set the scuttle down. "Pargeter will look through your box. There's nothing in my box." "Then it will not take long." It did not take long. Clara stood at the foot of her own attic bed, while Pargeter went through her trunk, laying each thing on the counterpane as he finished with it. 2 gowns, a shawl, a workbox, her mother's Bible, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with tape, her father's papers. There were perhaps 40 sheets, field sections, drainage plans, a bound notebook of mineral workings, the levels for the Ravenset cut, a certificate with a seal gone the color of weak tea. 7 years she had carried them from the blue bedroom to the attic and never once opened them in front of anybody. "What is this rubbish?" said Mrs. Barrowcliff from the doorway. "They're my father's. They are paper and they are in a trunk in my attic, and there is no coal in them." She turned to go, and then, in the tone of a woman remembering a small domestic economy, she said, "Burn them. The kitchen fire wants feeding, and I will not have hoarding in this house." Clara heard herself say, "No." It was the first time in 8 months she had used the word aloud, and it came out cracked in the middle and did no good whatsoever. Pargeter had the oilcloth under his arm already and was going down the attic stair with it, and Clara went after him. And Mrs. Barrowcliff said, without heat, Underhill, "The floor of the dining room is not finished." She got 3 sheets, 2 drainage plans, and the mineral notebook by putting her hand into the bundle as it went past her on the stair, and because Pargeter did not care enough to take them back. She stood in the passage with them crushed against her chest and heard the kitchen door open below. And a moment later, the soft roar a fire makes when it is given something dry. She did not go down. She went and finished the dining room floor and cried at about 4 in the afternoon, on her knees at the window end, quietly and with a good deal of efficiency, and then washed her face at the scullery tap and laid the table for people who would not thank her for it. The next morning she carried the tea across the yard as usual, because there was nothing else in the day worth getting up for, and she sat down on the bench and did not unwrap the pot. "They burned my father's papers yesterday," she said. The pitchfork stopped. "There were 40 sheets, and I saved 3. I have been carrying them about since I was 14 years old, and I could not save them because the coal in the scuttle had been counted, and there were 11 pieces too many, and she is never wrong about coal." Clara looked at the wall. "So somebody was kind to me. Somebody put coal in my scuttle or thought better of a cold girl or God knows. And my father went into the kitchen range." She heard him set the fork against the wall. She did not look round. "Don't be kind to me," she said. "I'm asking you seriously. In this house, whatever is kind to me burns." For a long time, the only sound was the horses. Then Nat Shaw came and sat down on the corn bin opposite her and put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor between his boots and said nothing at all, not a word, not one in Clara, who had expected some dry remark and had been braced against it, found that the silence unmade her far more thoroughly. She poured the tea. They drank it, turn and turn about, and neither of them spoke again until she stood up to go. Chapter 7. On the 23rd of December, Clara was sent to do the small parlor. The small parlor was Mrs. Barrowcliff's room in everything but name. It had a writing table in the window, a workbasket, 2 chairs, and a grate that was lit every day of the week, which was one more day than the library or the bedroom of any person in the house not named Barrowcliff. Clara came in at 7 with a hearth-box and a bucket and knelt down to clear the grate. The fire had gone out in the small hours. Under the top layer of gray there was a bed of ash still faintly warm, and in the ash there was paper, a good deal of it, burned late and in a hurry on a fire already dying, and not stirred afterwards. It had gone up in a slab rather than a scatter, and the underside had charred without catching. Clara had cleared that grate 3 or 4 mornings a week since April, and she had never before seen anything in it but coal. She looked at the door, which was shut. She put down the brush. The topmost leaves crumbled at a touch. Underneath, 3 or 4 sheets had fused at the fold and come out nearly whole brown as toast, the ink standing up black where the fire had cooked the paper round it. It was a valuation. She knew the form of it at once. A surveyor's report, ruled and columned, headed with the name of an estate and dated, Thornlie, in the North Riding of the County of York. Valuation of minerals and mineral rights. July 1856. Clara read down the columns with the ash on her fingers and stopped noticing the cold coming up out of the floor. She knew Regency Hill. Her father had spent 3 weeks on top of it with a level and a chain in the autumn of '48, and had told her at the kitchen table in Wakefield, with the plans spread on the oilcloth, that the lead under that hill was worked out, and that any man who put money into it after 50 would be putting it into a hole for the pleasure of hearing it drop. The valuation before her put the mineral rights of Regency and the Thornley South Moor at £84,000. It was not a mistake. It was 4 times what the whole estate could have fetched at auction with the house thrown in, and somebody had gone to considerable trouble over it, with subtotals and a note upon the probable yield per fathom. And at the foot of the last page, above a line of print, there was a paragraph in a different setting of type. The whole of the above described mineral rights, together with the surface lands appurtenant thereto, being charged and mortgaged in full to the North of England Mineral and Trust Company, Limited, of Threadneedle Street in the City of London. Clara turned the sheet over, looking for the hand that had done it. She found it in the bottom right corner, where a surveyor puts it, in the small formal script that such men keep for signing and use nowhere else, and which she would have known at 100 yards, on fire, at the bottom of a well. E.W. Underhill, C.E. The bucket went over. She did not hear it go. Her father had been dead 7 years and 6 months. He had died on a Thursday in June of '49 in a lodging house in Wakefield, with the shutters closed against the daylight, and she had sold his watch to bury him because there was nothing else left to sell, and had stood at the graveside with the rain coming down and no relation on either side of her. Somebody had taken his name out of the ground and made it sign a paper. Chapter 8. She did not sleep. At 10 minutes to 5 she was in the yard with the pot, and she went across the frost at a pace that had nothing to do with the cold. "I want you to look at something." She had it inside her bodice, folded in a clean rag. She put it on the bench under the lantern and stood back with her arms crossed, holding herself, and watched him read it. He read it the way she had read the survey book, and not the way a groom reads a paper. To the foot of the last page first, then to the head for the date, then back through the columns, and his face did something as he went that Clara had never seen on it. It emptied. Where did this come from? Her grate. She burned it the night before last, and the fire was too far gone to take it. Clara's voice was not entirely steady. "That's my father's signature. That is his hand, and he has been dead since '49, and that valuation is dated July." "Yes." "Then tell me what it is, because I have been awake all night with it, and I cannot make it come out any way that isn't mad." Nat Shaw put the sheet down flat on the bench and smoothed it with the side of his hand, and for a moment he did not say anything. Then he sat down on the corn bin and looked up at her. "Sit down," he said. "It's not mad. It's the commonest thing in England this year. There are men at it in every county between here and Cornwall, and half of them will be knighted before they're hanged. I don't understand." "Sit down." She sat. 2 years ago, he said, Parliament passed an act that let a company limit its liability. Last year it passed another that made a company as easy to set up as a public house, 7 men, a memorandum of fee. And you may call yourselves anything you like and print certificates as pretty as banknotes. The intention was to get money out of drawers and into mills and mines and shipping. What it has done besides that is to make a machine that anybody can work. This is how the machine goes. You want a property. You cannot buy it because you have no money, but you don't need to buy it. You need to charge it. So you find a piece of land with something under it that nobody has looked at in 20 years. You get a valuation. Not a false valuation with a false name on it that would be crude, a valuation signed by a real man with real letters after his name, who is respectable and known, and cannot be applied to for confirmation. He looked at her. Because he is dead. Clara sat very still. You then form your company, he said, with your valuation in your hand. Your company advances money on the security of the property. The property is worth, let us say, $20,000. Your paper says 84. So the company lends against 84, and the money goes out into the promoter's pocket, into the pockets of the men who set it up, into commissions and salaries and offices in Threadneedle Street, and the shares go out to whoever will buy them, which is chiefly small men in Leeds and Halifax and Bradford with £300 and no lawyer. And when the loan falls due and cannot be paid, the company forecloses and takes the land. But the land isn't worth what they lent. No. And by then the men who did it are somewhere else. The company is wound up, and the small men in Halifax have wallpaper. He turned the sheet with one finger. That is what this is. Somebody has raised £84,000 against a hill with nothing in it, and used your father to do it. Clara found her voice. Then it will fall in. It has already begun to. In September, the Royal British Bank shut its doors. You'll have read of it. Everybody has. When a thing like that goes down, every man in London who has been running the machine looks up and thinks, how long before somebody comes and asks me for my figures? Nat's face was grim. So they don't wait. They call in what they can, they take what they can hold, and they go. Whoever is doing this at Thornley is in a hurry. Lady Day, said Clara. He turned his head. There was a letter on the kitchen table a fortnight ago. Mr. Colshaw's hand. It said the last day was the 25th of March, and that after the 25th there was nothing left to discuss with anybody upon any terms. She swallowed. That's the day the loan falls due, isn't it? That would be my reading of it. But it can't be done. Clara heard her own voice go up and pulled it down. Thornley is settled land. It's entailed. The old Earl could not have sold an acre of it, and he told me so himself. He used to say the entail was the one thing that had ever saved him from his own opinions. A tenant for life cannot charge the estate. It isn't his to charge. No, said Nat Shaw, but an heir can bar the entail. There's been an act for it since '33. He goes to the courts. He executes a deed, and what was settled land becomes his to sell, mortgage, or lose at cards. He was watching her steadily. It requires him to be alive, to be recognized, and to sign. The lantern hissed. The heir, said Clara slowly, has been recognized since August, and he has not come, no. He has been in London for 4 months, being wounded, while she raises the rents and sells the timber and buys Rhenish wine. And Mr. Colshaw writes letters about the 25th of March. She stood up. He knows. Whoever he is, he knows. And he has signed. And he is coming here at 12th night to stand at the bottom of that staircase and let the county curtsy to him. She looked down at the man on the corban, at the gray eyes, the scar, the stiff leg, and something that had been standing quietly at the back of her mind for a week came forward and cleared its throat. How do you know all this? She said. The Acts of Parliament, the promoters, the men in Halifax. You are a groom in a stable, and you knew the whole of it before you finished reading the page. Nat Shaw handed her back her father's signature. I kept horses, he said, for men who knew. Chapter 9, that isn't an answer, Clara said. No, you kept horses for men who knew. You have said that to me twice now, and it is the same words both times, which is how a man talks when he has learned the sentence. She had not sat down again. Who are you? Nat Shaw got up off the corn bin. He did it the way he did everything, in the wrong order. Taking the weight on the right leg first, and bringing the left through after, and she had watched him do it 100 times and had never once thought to wonder what a man with a knee like that was doing forking dung in a north yard in December for £9 a year. "I'll tell you," he said, after 12th night. "That's 12 days. 13. He said it without hesitating, which told her that he had counted that morning, as he had probably counted every morning, the night of the ball or the day after, not before. "You have my word on it, for whatever you think that's worth, and I am aware that you have no reason to think it worth anything at all. Then give me a reason. I can give you the truth about the part that matters, which is not the same thing." He looked at her steadily. "There is a man in London who is telling a lie. He has been telling it since August, and he has been believed. And every day that he is believed, this estate goes further into a hole it will not come out of. I cannot prove he is lying with anything I have got. The proof is inside that house." "What proof?" "Two things. The current ledgers, Culshaw's books, the ones that are locked in the estate office, the rentals, and the timber, and the wages, and the old Earl's letter book." Clara frowned. "The letter book? Every gentleman of his generation kept one. He wrote his letters and pressed a copy into a bound book before they went. And by the end of his life there were probably 30 years of them on a shelf in that library." Nat's voice had gone careful in a way she noticed. "I want to know what he wrote in the last year of his life, and to whom, and about what. And you cannot get either of them yourself. I cannot get into the house. I am a groom. If I am found above stairs after dark, I am turned off in the morning, and there is no second chance at it, and I have no character to lose and nowhere further down to go." He paused. "And if I could get into that office, I could not read half of what was in it. You looked at your father's field book for 4 seconds and told me why a field floods. It would take me a fortnight to learn what you know, and I have not got a fortnight." Clara stood with the burnt valuation in her hand. "If I am caught," she said, "I am not sent to Whitby. I am put out on the road that night in January with 4 shillings. Yes. You might have said it wouldn't happen. It might. It would be a lie." "Yes," said Clara, "it would." She folded the valuation and put it back inside her bodice and drew her shawl across it. "12th night, then. And on the 13th, I shall ask you again, and if you tell me another sentence you have learned by heart, I shall never bring you tea again as long as I live." Something crossed his face that might, on a less ruined one, have been a smile. "That," said Nat Shaw, "is the most serious threat anyone has made me in 3 years." She went out past the last stall, and the roan mare came round at her with her ears flat, and Clara stepped left instead of right without thinking, and got herself nipped on the shoulder for it, hard enough to bruise. "Bramble," said Nat, from behind her, in the tone of a man addressing a colleague who has let him down. "Off the right. I keep telling you." Clara went out into the dark, rubbing her shoulder, and it did not occur to her until she was halfway across the yard that in 8 weeks she had never once heard anybody else in that stable call the mare by name. Chapter 10. She did it on the 29th of December, because Mrs. Barrowcliff and both her daughters went to dine at Marska that evening and were not expected back before 11, and because a thing put off past its chance is not put off, it is abandoned. The estate office was on the ground floor of the North Passage, between the gun room and the coal stair door. Its own door was locked at all times, and there were 2 keys, one on Mr. Culshaw's chain, one on the chatelaine at Mrs. Barrowcliff's waist that went upstairs with her at night. There was a 3rd way in, and Clara had known about it since she was 15, because a girl who is bored and has the run of a large house learns the parts nobody looks at. Some economical farers had run the coal stair through the corner of the office and boxed it out, and where the boxing met the old wall there was a panel 11 inches wide, screwed rather than nailed, so that the flue could be swept. It was a tight fit for a girl of 15. She was not 15. She went down at 9 with a screwdriver from the gunroom, in her stockings, carrying an unlit dark lantern. The house was quiet in the particular way of a house, with only servants in it, the noise all at the far end, in the kitchen. 4 screws, stiff and then easy. She pocketed them, lifted the panel away, and went through on her back, and the coal dust of 40 years came with her. Inside, she made herself count to 20 before she opened the lantern's shutter, and even then only to a slit. She had never been in the room, and she had imagined it wrong. She had expected a desk with the ledgers on it. What was there was 40 feet of shelving tin boxes, rolled plans, files of receipted bills going back to the reign of George III, and a great many books, all bound alike, and none of them labeled where the slit of light could find it. She began at the wrong end. That was the only real mistake, and it cost her everything. She had got through 2 shelves tithe accounts, enclosure awards, nothing later than 1,841, and had just understood, with a lurch, that the current books must be on the near side of the door when she heard the horse in the yard. She had the lantern shut before she had finished hearing it. She got behind the leather screen in the corner because it was the nearest thing and not because it was any good, and she pressed her back to the cold wall and put both hands over the lantern to stop any light coming out of the seams. The key went into the lock. Mr. Culshaw came in. He shut the door behind him. He lit the lamp on the desk. She saw the yellow of it come round the edge of the screen, and then he did not do anything at all for a while. And Clara stood with her heart going like a bird in a bag and waited for him to notice the panel lying against the boxing 11 feet from his chair. He did not notice it. He sat down. He was a heavy, sallow man of 50 who never looked at anyone he spoke to, and Clara had built him in her head over 8 months as a small, greasy thief with a good hand and a bad conscience. He put his elbows on the desk and his face in his hands, and he began to cry. Not quietly. It went on for a long time, in the ugly, ratcheting way that men cry who are out of practice, and Clara stood 4 feet behind him, in the dark, with her fingers over the lantern seams, and could not stop hearing it. Twice he said something, and the second time she caught it whole. "Oh, Jem," he said, "you bloody fool. You bloody, bloody fool." Then he blew his nose and got up and took a bound book from a shelf on the near side of the door. She saw exactly which one and put it under his arm and turned the lamp out and locked the door behind him. Clara counted to 400 before she moved. She got out through the panel, put the 4 screws back, and was in her attic with the lantern under the bed before the household came home. She had coal dust in her hair and not one figure to show for any of it. And in the morning, when the light came, there was a track of wet gray boot prints across the flags of the North Passage, from the coal stair door to the corner, drying where somebody had run. Chapter 11. They turned off Mrs. Skelton at 11 o'clock the next morning, and she was out of the house by 1. The charge was theft. A pair of silver sugar tongs, missing since the 22nd, had been found wrapped in flannel at the bottom of the housekeeper's press, and the press was locked, and the housekeeper had the key. Dinah Skelton had come to Thornley as a still-room maid when the old Earl's wife was alive, and had run the house since 41, and she was 58, and she stood in the servants' hall in her bonnet with her box at her feet and said to nobody in particular, 26 years. "You will understand," said Mrs. Barrowcliff, "that in the circumstances there can be no character." Clara stood at the back with her hands twisted in her apron and could not make herself look at anyone. "It was me." The words were in her mouth all morning, and she did not say them, and she was to think about that a long time afterwards. If she had said them, she would have been on the road by dinner time. The ledgers would have stayed locked, and there would have been nobody left in the house to do anything at all. She knew that. It did not make the smallest difference to how it felt. Clara found her in the linen room, waiting for the cart, standing among the shelves she had counted for 26 years, and shut the door. "Mrs. Skelton, I know it wasn't you took the tongs." The old woman did not turn round. "I know it because I know who did, which is the same person who has taken everything else out of this house since April, and it is not a person who is ever going to be searched." She ran her hand along a shelf edge. "You're going to say something foolish now. Don't. You've no character neither, and no place, and no more chance of being believed than I have. Save it for when it'll buy something." Clara stood there with her eyes stinging. "Now listen to me," said Mrs. Skelton, "because I've 4 minutes, and I've been wanting to say this since March, and there's nobody left in that house to say it to but you. 1. His lordship the old one had Mr. Pike up from London a fortnight before he died. Not in the day. At night. Came in a fly from Northallerton at 10 and went again before 6. And I know because I sat up and made the library fire myself and was told to make it myself. And I'd had 26 years of that man, and he never once did a piece of business by night. 2. There was an iron box in his bedroom, under the window, Japan black, about so long." She held her hands apart. "I dusted round it twice a week for 11 years. It was there the morning he died. It was gone the week after the funeral, and I have never seen it since, and no one has ever mentioned it to me." Clara's mouth was dry. "And 3? Mrs. Skelton turned round at last. 3. She doesn't spend it. I beg your pardon? You've all got it fixed in your heads that she's a greedy woman filling her pockets. I've served her 8 months. I've done her rooms and her linen and her fires." The old woman's face was hard and perfectly certain. "She turns her own gowns. She's had 1 bonnet since April, and it's been retrimmed twice. She counts candles on a Saturday night with a slate mind, so as not to waste paper. Miss Rosamond's fittings and the Rhenish wine, that's for show. That's the shop window. And even that's on account, and I've seen the bills. Whatever's going out of Thornley, it isn't going into that woman's back. Then, that's your business now, not mine." She picked up her gloves. "Folk who steal to spend, they get fat and they get careless. She's got thinner since August, and she doesn't sleep. I've heard her on the landing at 3 in the morning, more times than I can count." She pulled the gloves on. "A woman who counts candles isn't spending. A woman who counts candles is paying something." The cart came round. Clara carried her box out for her. At the yard door Mrs. Skelton stopped and looked away across the cobbles at the stable arch, and stood there for 3 or 4 seconds longer than a woman stands when she is only thinking about a cart. "Don't go to Whitby, love," she said, "whatever she tells you. Sit tight. Mrs. Skelton, this house is going to have somebody come back to it," said Mrs. Skelton, "and I'd sooner you were standing in it when he does." And she got up on the cart and went down the drive, and Clara stood in the arch in the wind and had not the least idea on earth what she meant. Chapter 12. The last Tuesday of the year, the post came up at 11. Clara was on the half landing with an armful of holly and ivy for the great hall, which was to be dressed for Twelfth night, and she stopped there and did not go down, and made herself a screen out of a bough of holly and the newel post, and watched. Pargeter brought the letters in on the salver. Mrs. Barrowcliff came out of the small parlor and took them standing, and went through them, the way she went through everything, fast and flat 1, 2, and on the 3rd one she stopped. She stood in the middle of the hall, with her back to the stairs, in the gray light out of the great window, and she looked at the outside of a letter for the length of time it takes to say the Lord's Prayer. Then she went into the small parlor and turned the key. Clara came down the stairs with the holly and stood outside the door and heard nothing whatever, for perhaps a minute and a half. Then she heard a chair go back on the boards, hard, She took the holly through to the hall, and she came back at 5 o'clock in the evening when Mrs. Barrowcliff had gone up to dress, and the small parlor was empty, and the fire in it was 3 hours old. She went to the grate on her knees, and she was in luck, or the opposite of luck, because this time it had not been burned in a slab. It had been torn across twice and pushed into a good hot fire and stirred, and what came out on the end of the poker was a fistful of curled black nothing, and one corner folded double, about the size of a playing card. Clara carried it up to the attic in her apron and unfolded it on the counterpane by the window with the last of the daylight and read it 3 times. There was no salutation and no signature. What there was ran thus, in a small, elegant, extremely regular hand, that I have twice put you to the trouble of this reminder, and I dislike a third. The instruments to which I refer are your late husband's. They are perfectly good, and they are in my hands. I have no present intention of putting any of them before an attorney, and no wish to see 2 young women of good manners obliged to earn their bread among strangers. But I must beg you to be practical. The whole of the business rests upon the 25th of March. Until that day I require the house quiet, the country satisfied, and yourself precisely where you are. It is a small thing I ask, and I ask it in the friendliest spirit. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed. She had built her picture of Augusta Barrowcliff out of docked wages and counted candles and a mud hem dragged across a waxed floor, and had been so sure of it that she never once asked why a woman robbing an estate of £84,000 should be turning her own gowns. 11 bills of exchange drawn by a dead Leeds wool factor, in the hands of a man in London who wrote like a bishop and did not sign his name. Mrs. Barrowcliff was not the spider. She was what had been put in the house to keep it quiet while the thing was done, a respectable relation to receive the county, a hand to sign for the wine, a face at the top of the table, a widow with 2 daughters and 11 signatures round her neck. And Clara, sitting in the cold with the scrap in her fingers, discovered something about herself she did not care for in the least. She did not forgive her. Not the coal, not the attic, not the 4 and 6pence, not her father's papers going into the kitchen range. The woman had done every one of those with her own hands and her own reasons. But she understood her, and that was the trouble. She had spent 8 months hating something simple, and now she was obliged to go on hating something complicated, which is much harder work and gives nothing back. She got up at last and lit the candle and put the scrap of paper with the burnt valuation inside her bodice, where the 2 of them lay flat against her ribs like a pair of playing cards held back from a hand. Chapter 13. She was mending a collar in the kitchen at 9 that night when Mrs. Barrowcliff came down. That in itself was strange. Mrs. Barrowcliff did not come below stairs after dinner. Bess had gone up. The range had been damped. Clara was on the settle with a tallow candle at her elbow and one of her own 2 gowns across her knees, unpicking the collar to turn it. The door opened, and the woman came in and stood there in her black gown, and Clara got up. "Sit down," said Mrs. Barrowcliff. "Finish it." Clara sat down and did not finish it. She held the needle where it was and waited, and Mrs. Barrowcliff came round the end of the table and looked at the work in her lap for a long time without saying anything at all. "You have turned the seam the wrong way," she said at last. "Ma'am, you are laying the new edge outward. It will be the first thing to go again, and you will be doing it a 3rd time in the spring. Turn it inward and lose a 1/4 inch at the neck, and it will see you 2 years." She said it flatly, as she said everything. I was taught that at 19. Clara looked up. Mrs. Barrowcliff was not looking at her. She had her hands folded at her waist, and she was looking at the tallow candle, And when she spoke again, she spoke in exactly the voice in which she docked wages and dismissed housekeepers, which was, Clara understood some time later, the only voice she had left. My father was a curate near Sleaford, she said. There were 5 of us and all girls, and £90 a year, and my mother turned the collars, and we turned them after her. Do you know what a curate's daughter has at 19, with 4 sisters? Nothing at all. She has a good hand, her figure, a reputation that can be destroyed by a single afternoon, and the arithmetic. Mrs. Barrowcliff's chin came up. There are 3 doors. She may marry, if anyone will have her, without a shilling. She may go out as a governess, which is to be a servant that the servants are permitted to despise. Or she may go to some aunt and read to her, and take her arm on the stairs and outlive her, and be left £40 and a workbox, and be 60 years old. I took the first door. Mr. Barrowcliff was a wool factor in Leeds. He was 41 and I was 20, and I could not endure the smell of him. I am not complaining. I knew what I was buying, and I paid for it for 24 years and would do it again tomorrow. The fire ticked. You think I hate you, said Mrs. Barrowcliff. I do not. When I came into this house in April and saw you in that blue bedroom with your books and your ledgers and your dead man's fondness all over you like a good coat, I did not think, there is a creature I shall enjoy putting down. She turned her head at last and looked at Clara directly, and her eyes were entirely dry and entirely certain. I thought, there I am. That is exactly what I was at 19 before I learned the arithmetic, and she does not know it yet. She thinks that being loved by an old man is the same thing as being provided for. So I shall not tell you, I am sorry, because I am not, and you would know it. I shall tell you the truth instead, which is worth more and costs me nothing. She moved to the door. I remember you, and I shall put you out all the same, because there is not room for both of us in one house, and I have 4 sisters who found that out later than I did, and are none of them alive to argue about it. She stopped with her hand on the latch. Turn it inward, she said. You will thank me in the spring, and she went up. Clara sat on for a long while with the collar in her lap. Then she unpicked what she had done and turned the seam inward, and lost the 1/4 inch at the neck, because the woman was right about it, and because there was nobody else left in the house who was going to tell her anything useful. Chapter 14. On the last morning of the year, it was too cold to talk. 12 degrees of frost, and a wind off the moor that came in under the stable door, and lay along the floor like water. They did not sit apart on the bench and the bin as they generally did. Clara sat down and Nat Shaw sat beside her, without either of them making anything of it, because there was one blanket, and it was that or freeze. They passed the cup. Neither of them said anything for a while, and it was not awkward. She had been carrying the folded scrap about for 2 days, trying to decide whether to show it to him. And what stopped her was not doubt about him. It was a queer reluctance she recognized only afterwards as shame. She showed him in the end. He read it twice and gave it back. 11 bills of exchange, he said. She's not the thief. She's a thief. She has taken your wages and your father's papers and 26 years off a woman who never did her any harm, and she'd do it again tomorrow. He said it without any softening at all. But no. She is not the man who is doing this. She has been put here to hold the door open and keep the county calm and sign for the wine, and she is doing it with somebody's hand round her throat. Then she might be, don't. He looked at her. Don't get to, she might be brought over. Not yet. A frightened person is the most dangerous ally there is, because they will sell you at the exact moment the fear turns. And you can never tell in advance which way it will turn. Leave her alone. Clara turned the cup in her hands. Then who? Nat Shaw stood up. He stood in the middle of the stable floor with the lantern behind him and his breath going up, and Clara. watching him, thought, he has just stopped being careful about something, and did not know what. Then the enemy is not in this house at all, he said. I have been 8 weeks in this yard watching the wrong woman. It is not Barrowcliff, and it is not Colshaw, and Colshaw is being held by the same kind of rope, because I have heard him crying in that office twice, and men do not cry over money they are getting. He turned round. It is one man, in London, who has never set foot in Yorkshire, who does not sign his letters, and who has a name. And when I have the name, I will have the whole of it. How will you get it? Out of those books, said Nat Shaw. There will be a wage in there, paid to somebody who does no work. There always is. He sat down again. The wind came under the door. Clara poured out the last of the pot, and in taking the cup from him, her fingers went across the back of his hand, and stopped there. What happened to your hand? He did not answer at once, and she took hold of it before she could think better of it, and turned it to the light, because she was cold and tired and past minding her manners, and because it had been going to happen sooner or later. The little finger of his left hand was bent, not stiff bent, curved inward from the second joint like a hook, so that it lay across the palm at an angle no straight finger ever lay. That's an old break, said Clara. That's a child's break. Nobody said it. He took his hand back. He did it fast, faster than the cold or the courtesy of it justified, and put it flat on his knee out of the light. No, he said. Nobody did. Clara let it alone. She turned the cup over instead idly, the way she had a dozen times, and looked at the shallow, worn figures stamped into the base of it. What does this number mean? It's a regimental number. Yours? It's the cup's. Then after a moment, yes. Then say it. I have looked at it every morning for 8 weeks, and I've never once heard you say it. He said the number in the flat way a man says a thing he has said 10,000 times and would rather not say again, and Clara nodded and put the cup down and stored it, without knowing why, in the same place at the back of her mind where she kept the boot prints in the North Passage and the way he had said Bramble. She stood to go. She was at the door when she remembered. You didn't hear me the other morning, she said. When you were with the gray, I called you 3 times. Which side were you standing? Your left. That's why. He did not look up from the strap he had picked up. That side's gone. It went 2 years ago, and it isn't coming back. So don't stand there, and don't waste your breath. And if you ever want me in a hurry, come round the front, where I can see you. 2 years ago, said Clara. 2 years ago. He stood up and put the strap on its hook and turned round, and there was something in his face she had never seen there, not warmth exactly, more like a man setting a heavy thing down carefully because he cannot carry it any further. Clara, listen to me now, because I shall not have another quiet morning to say it in. On 12th night there will be a great deal happening in that house. Whatever you see, whatever anybody tells you, whatever anybody asks you to put your name to, do not sign it. Not a paper, not a book, not a receipt, nothing. And do not leave this parish before the 13th of January. Not to Whitby, not anywhere, not if she puts you in the cart herself. He said it quite levelly. Give me until the 13th. That is the whole of what I am asking. Clara stood in the doorway with the empty pot in her hands and the wind coming past her. Why the 13th? Because by then it will not matter what I ask you. She looked at him for a long moment, the scar, the gray eyes, the leg, the hand he was holding out of the light. All right, she said. She was to think about that morning for the rest of her life, not for what was said in it, but because it was the last one in which she still believed she understood the shape of the world. Chapter 15 on the 1st of January. His lordship would arrive on 12th night. 4 months of waiting collapsed into 5 days. The chandeliers came down and were washed luster by luster in vinegar and water. 40 wax candles were fetched up from Bedale at a price Mrs. Barrowcliff wrote on the slate with her mouth shut hard, An ox was killed. The dressmaker came out from York twice, and Rosamond stood on a stool in the long gallery for 2 hours at a time in silver blue while her mother watched from the window seat and did not once look at the gown. Clara worked from 5 in the morning to 1 the next, and was too tired to be frightened, which was a mercy of a kind. On the 4th of January, Selina lost a necklace. It was done in the passage outside the linen room, in front of Bess Yeadon and 2 girls up from the village, and it was done well. Selina came along with the thing in her hand, garnets, her mother's, of no great value and considerable sentiment, and stopped Clara with an armful of table linen and said, "Stand still. I want to see it against something plain," and put it round Clara's neck and did up the clasp herself. Then she took it off again and went away, and came back 4 minutes later at the top of her voice. They searched her in the housekeeper's room, Mrs. Barrowcliff standing by the window and taking no part in it. The necklace was in the pocket of Clara's apron, under her scissors. "I did not put it there," said Clara. "No," said Mrs. Barrowcliff. The room went entirely still. Bess's mouth came open. "Miss Selina, you will go upstairs," said Mrs. Barrowcliff. "Underhill, you will finish the linen. All of you will hold your tongues, and you will each of you understand," she said, in the same flat voice, taking in the room, "that this house has one occasion in front of it, and that anything whatever which occurs before Wednesday night is a thing that did not occur." They went. She kept Clara back with 2 fingers. "After Epiphany you go to Whitby," she said. "My sister will have you. It is not a good place, and you will not thank me for it, and it is a great deal better than the road, which is the alternative and which is entirely within my power." She looked at her. "You will not make difficulties for me on Wednesday night." "No, ma'am. If you do understand me, you will not be sent to Whitby. You will be sent to York." She let go, and not in the character of a servant. It was Selina who found her an hour later in the linen room. She came in and shut the door, and stood against it with her arms folded, and looked so exactly like her mother that Clara took a step back. "I'm not going to apologize," Selina said. "I didn't imagine you were." "Good." She looked at the shelves. "You should go to Whitby. I'm perfectly serious. Go on the 7th, and don't argue about it, and don't take anything with you that you mind losing." Her mouth twisted. "You are the only person under this roof with a door still open, Underhill, and you're standing in it, holding it with your foot, as though you were owed something. Nobody is owed anything. This house is going down, and I would rather one of us got out." Clara stared at her. "Down? Fold your linen," said Selina Barrowcliff, and went out. Chapter 16. The 6th of January came in with snow. By 4 in the afternoon the drive was a white road, and the carriages had begun to come up it in a slow line out of the dark, the squires and their wives from Wensleydale and Swaldale, the Havelocks from Marske, the vicar, the magistrate's clerk, 3 or 4 families who had driven half a day through weather for the privilege of being early. The great hall of Thornley had not been lit since March, and it was lit now, 40 wax candles in the 2 chandeliers, coals of lamps down the gallery, a fire in the great hearth that had taken 2 men an hour to build, and a quartet of hired musicians in the minstrel's gallery, playing to a room that was not yet listening. Mrs. Barrowcliff received at the foot of the staircase, in her 3rd black gown with the late Countess's diamonds at her throat, which were not hers to wear, and which nobody was going to say so, with Rosamond on her right and Selina on her left, arranged like 2 objects on a mantelpiece. Clara was in the passage behind the staircase, in a clean gray gown and a white cap, carrying trays. Nobody looks at a servant. It was the one mercy of the uniform. She went along the edges of the room with the glasses, eyes down, and heard the county talk about the man they had come to see, that he was lame, that there was a face nobody would care to look at, that a title was a title, At 4:30, she took a tray of ratafia into the corner by the stairs, where Mrs. Barrowcliff stood with her hands folded, waiting. And Clara, coming past her, put her foot down on the trailing edge of her own gown and went sideways, and the whole tray of it went over the woman's left sleeve. The noise it made stopped the nearest 20 people. Mrs. Barrowcliff struck her across the face once, open-handed and hard, in front of Pargeter and Bess and 2 footmen and the wife of the rector of Marsk the first, and only time in 8 months she had put a hand on her. "Get a cloth," she said. Clara got a cloth. She went down on her knees on the flags in front of half the county, with her cheek going up like a bell being struck, and took the wet sleeve in both hands and worked at it, apologizing steadily under her breath. And the chatelaine hung at Mrs. Barrowcliff's waist 8 inches from her right hand, and the small iron key of the estate office came off its ring and into Clara's palm and up her cuff while her face was down. "That will do," said Mrs. Barrowcliff. "Go to the back." Clara went to the back. She stood in the servants' passage with her cheek burning and the key inside her cuff, shaking so hard she had to put both hands flat on the stone. The cost was not the slap. She had understood that 4 days ago, lying awake, not the blow, which would fade, but the 60 people who had just watched Augusta Barrowcliff strike a servant, and who would all remember, when it came to be discussed, that the servant had been searched for a necklace on Sunday. She had bought her way into that room with her own character, and she had known the price and paid it. Out in the great hall, the music stopped. Then a hush came rolling back through the crowd like a wave going the wrong way, and Clara heard Pargeter's voice and a staff striking the floor of the landing 3 times. Chapter 17, she ran. The whole house had turned its face to the top of the great staircase and was holding its breath. And Clara Underhill went the other way in her stockinged feet, with her boots in one hand and a dark lantern in the other, down the servants' passage, past the still room, through the door to the north passage, and along it to the estate office, and there was nobody at all between her and it, because every living soul at Thornley that had legs was in the great hall. The key turned. She had 4 minutes if it was a short speech, and perhaps 20 if the county behaved as it generally behaved. She shut the door, set the lantern on the desk, and opened the shutter wide, because she was never going to do this again, near side of the door. They were exactly where Culshaw had gone for his book on the 29th of December, 3 shelves at chest height, bound alike, the years in ink on the spines, rentals, wages, timber, household. She had them down and open in under a minute, with her pencil out and the backs of 4 sheets of writing paper flat beside them. And then she stopped being frightened, because there was no room left in her for it. Look at the rentals first. Then look at what the rentals do not say. The rent roll for the McCalmus quarter ran 11 pages. She went down it with the pencil, and the shape of it came up at her. Within half a minute, the way a face comes out of a crowd. There were 43 tenancies on the roll. She had checked the Thornley rentals against the old Earl's own figures every quarter day since she was 16, and there were 31. She wrote down the 12 that were not real: Cowslip Garth, Netherfold, High Riggs, good Yorkshire names with no ground under them, each paying between £11 and £19 a quarter, each remitted punctually, each initialed in the margin in a small, cramped, sweating hand. And the rents of the real ones had been raised twice in 14 months. She went to the wages book. It carried 32 laborers on the home farm in the middle of January, which was more than that farm had ever employed in a good August. She went to the timber book. The whole of the South Wood, 409 oaks, felled and carted in September, sold to a yard at Thirsk for £960, and the £960 appeared in no estate account in that month or any other. Her hand was flying. She had gone past thinking and was simply copying in her father's shorthand, and it was 3 or 4 minutes before her eye caught on something she had passed twice already. In the household book, quarterly, under a heading of its own, to Agency London 50, 4 times a year, £200 a year, going out of a house that was being run on short coal to an agency in London with no name, no address, and no account rendered. She wrote it down and underlined it twice. And then, at the bottom of the third shelf, standing on its own end, she found the thing that stopped her. It was a bundle of parchments in green tape, engrossed in a clerk's copperplate with a stamp in the corner and a seal at the foot, and Clara had never seen one in her life before and knew what it was inside of 4 words. This indenture, made the 11th day of August, 1856. The disentailing assurance enrolled in Chancery. The mineral rights and 900 acres of the South Moor mortgaged to the North of England Mineral and Trust Company, Limited, to secure £84,000, the whole repayable in one payment on the 25th day of March, 1857, and at the foot, above the wax, in a firm educated hand, N. Ferrers. Clara knelt down on the floor with the parchment in both hands. Somebody had to have signed. A disentailing deed cannot be forged into existence by a widow and a steward. It goes through the courts, it is enrolled, and the heir must appear and be identified and put his name to it before witnesses who are paid to be certain. He had signed in August. And the unsigned letters from Threadneedle Street, and the 11 bills round Augusta Barrowcliff's neck, and this house scoured and lit and hung with holly for 4 months, none of it was being done to the Earl of Thornley. It was being done by him. She copied the deed, the date, the sum, the parties, the day of redemption, and her hand shook so badly on the last line that she had to write it twice. Then she put everything back as she had found it, and folded her 4 sheets into a square the size of a card and pushed it down inside her bodice with the burnt valuation and the corner of the London letter. There was one thing more. The library was 3 doors along and black dark, and she went into it with the lantern shut and did not need it because she had spent 7 years in that room and could have walked it blindfold. The letter book stood on the 3rd shelf of the case by the window, one for every year since 1825, with the years on the spines in gold. She took 1856. It was thin, he had died in March, and it went under her arm inside the shawl, and she was back at the servant's door in 40 seconds. Behind it, the great hall had gone entirely silent. She had meant to go up the back stairs and put the papers under the loose board by the chimney. She abandoned it at the door for the simplest reason there is. She wanted to see him. She wanted to look at the man who had sold 900 acres of moor out from under 31 families, and then let the county stand in the snow 4 months to see him, and she wanted to be able to say afterwards that she had seen his face. She put down her boots and smoothed her cap, and picked up a tray of empty glasses from the sill, and went through the door into the great hall. Chapter 18. The crowd had drawn back from the staircase into a wide half-circle. The way a crowd does around something it has been told is remarkable. Mrs. Barrowcliff stood at the center of it, with her back to Clara and her daughters on either side, and every face was lifted to the landing. And on the staircase, coming down, one stair at a time because the left would not bend, was the Earl of Thornley. He was in black, not a servant's black, but the deep, plain, immaculate black of a man who has no interest whatever in being looked at. His hair had been cut, his boots caught the light. He came down slowly with his right hand on the rail and his weight going on to the good side at each step, and the scar ran pale from temple to jaw and took the light of 40 candles all the way down. Clara stopped breathing. It was Nat Shaw, the tin cup, the corn bin, the survey book under the floorboard, the rusted laugh, and the gray eyes and the leg that swung wide and come at her from the right. And that side's gone. It went 2 years ago, and do not sign anything. And do not leave this parish before the 13th. It was Nat Shaw, and he was the Earl, and had been the whole time sleeping in the loft over the tack room, mucking out his own stalls, walking 12 miles in weather for a letter, letting a girl in a gray gown buy him tea out of a tin cup with leaves stolen an ounce at a time from a caddy that was counted. The tray went out of her hands. It went down flat, and the glasses went across the flags with a noise like a window coming in, and 200 faces came round to the servant standing against the wall by the passage door, including his. He had reached the 3rd stair from the bottom. He stopped there, with his hand on the rail, and looked at her down the whole length of that bright, crowded room, and his eyes did not go past her the way an earl's eyes go past a servant. They stopped, they held, and something went out of his face that had been in it for 8 weeks. Some braced thing, some carried weight, and what was underneath it was so nearly relief that Clara felt it go through her like a blow. "Clumsy little fool," said Mrs. Barrowcliff into the silence, without turning round. "Get out. Get out of this hall, and leave her." His voice cut across the room, low and rough and entirely without effort, and it stopped Augusta Barrowcliff's tongue in the middle of a word. He came down the last 3 stairs and straightened, and there was nothing left of the man on the corn bin at all. This was somebody who had stood in front of 500 men and told them to walk towards a wall, and the whole glittering county felt it in the back of the neck and went quiet. Mrs. Barrowcliff recovered. She sank into a curtsy that took her nearly to the floor, and her daughters went down on either side of her like 2 felled saplings. "Your lordship, forgive us. A servant nothing whatever she is under notice already, and she shall be gone tonight." "Do get up, madam," he said. "You'll be there all evening." She rose. The smile stayed on her face and had nothing behind it. "Your lordship is very good. May I present my daughters, my elder, Miss Rosamond Barrow." "We have not been introduced," he said, "and yet you appear to know a great deal about me. You have known me a week, I understand. Fittings on the 3rd and the 5th. Curtsies in the long gallery. My marriage arranged over the soup." He let it fall into the room 1 piece at a time, in a perfectly conversational voice, and nobody in that hall so much as moved a fan. "I have had the advantage of you, Mrs. Barrowcliff," he said. "I have known you 10 weeks. The color went out of her face in a single sweep, from the jaw upwards, the way water goes out of a tilted glass. "I came north at the end of October," he said, "alone, on foot, from North Allerton. I have spent 12 years learning that the fastest way to understand a position is to look at it before anybody knows you are looking. And a great estate one has not seen since one was 19, full of strangers with reasons to lie, is a position." He looked round the hall once, unhurried. "So I took work in my own stables under my mother's name, and I watched, and I listened, and I have learned a very great deal indeed about how Thornley has been managed in my absence. I have learned who turned off a steward of 22 years without a character for asking about the timber, and a housekeeper of 26 years over a pair of sugar tongs that were never taken. I have learned that the rents here have been raised twice in 14 months, on land that floods, while Rhenish wine came up the drive by the crate. And I have learned," he said, "precisely whose initials stand in the margin of my rent roll beside 12 farms that do not exist." Mrs. Barrowcliff's mouth opened and shut. Behind her, in the shadow by the screen's passage, Mr. Ephraim Culshaw had begun to move, sideways and softly, in the direction of the door. "Stop that man," said the Earl. Without raising his voice at all, and two of Sir Roger Havelock's servants took Mr. Culshaw by the arms before he had got 4 feet. "This is monstrous." Mrs. Barrowcliff's composure went all at once, and what came out from under it was shrill and thin and very frightened. "This is you have no proof of anything. You have the word of a stable hand the books are locked. They have always been locked. There are 2 keys in this house, and I have one of them, and Mr. Culshaw has the other." "Yes," said the Earl of Thornley, "I know. I have spent 3 nights of my life on that lock." He turned his head and looked back down the room to the passage door. "But I rather think," he said, "that the figures will find their way to the magistrate all the same." Chapter 19. Clara walked out into the middle of the great hall. She was aware of it afterwards only in pieces, the flags cold through her stockings, a glass crunching under her heel, the whole horseshoe of the county turning as she came. She stopped 10 feet from Augusta Barrowcliff in a gray gown and a white cap, with her cheeks still marked, and took the folded square of paper out of her bodice and held it up, and her fingers were black with pencil to the second joint. Mrs. Barrowcliff made a sound. "It was not a word 12 tenancies," said Clara. Her voice shook. It also carried right up into the minstrel's gallery, because the hall had been built in 1590 to carry a voice, and there was not another sound in it. Cowslip Garth, Netherfold, Highrigs, and 9 others. They stand on the Michaelmas rent roll at between 11 and 19 pounds the quarter, and they are not places. There is no such farm as Cowslip Garth on this estate, and never has been. 32 laborers on the home farm wages book in January, and I have carried the beer out there and counted 9. 409 oaks out of the South Wood for 960 pounds, and the 960 pounds is in no account in this house, and 50 pounds a quarter to an agency in London with no name to it. She turned the paper over, and a valuation of the minerals of this estate at 84,000 pounds, dated July, on ground that was surveyed and written off as worked out in 48. She looked at Mrs. Barrowcliff, and 8 months of swallowed things came up and stood steady behind her eyes. "It is signed," she said, "by Edward Underhill." The whole room heard the name and did not know it. One man did old Sir Roger Havelock at the front, who had employed him twice, and Clara saw his head come round. "He was my father. He died of the cholera in June of 49, in a lodging house in Wakefield with the shutters shut. I was 14, and I sold his watch to bury him because there was nothing else left to sell. And I stood at the grave with the rain coming down and not one relation on either side of me." Her voice cracked, and she went straight on through it. "He has been in the ground 7 years. Somebody dug his name up out of it to steal a hill with. You were going to bleed this place white and be gone before anybody understood what had been done, and you would have, too. You would have managed it perfectly. You were only wrong about one thing." "Underhill," said Mrs. Barrowcliff. "You thought nobody in this house was worth watching," said Clara. "You were standing in a room with 2 of us. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Sir Roger Havelock came forward out of the crowd with his hand out for the paper, and it was over. It was, at any rate, what being over feels like." Clara stood in the middle of the great hall, with her ears ringing and the marks of the pencil on her fingers, and the magistrate had her evidence in his hand, and the Earl of Thornley was 6 feet away, looking at her with an expression she would not be able to describe for the rest of her life. And somewhere behind her a woman had begun to cry in a way that had no dignity in it at all. That was when the great door opened. Chapter 20. The cold came in first, off the snow, straight down the length of the hall, and every candle in both chandeliers lay over sideways together. 3 men came in out of the dark. There was snow on their shoulders and on the crown of one hat, and they had the look of people who have been an hour and a half on a bad road and have been thinking about it. The first was a gentleman of about 45 in a plain and extremely good traveling coat, with a smooth, pleasant, closed sort of face. And he came into that scene a woman weeping, a steward held by the arms, a servant girl in the middle of the floor with her hair down and looked round it with an air of the mildest possible regret, as though he had walked in on a family at prayers. The second was an elderly man in black with a leather case under his arm, snow in his whiskers, blinking. The third was tall. He was well made and well dressed, and perhaps 38, and he wore the undress coat of an officer without any regiment about it. And he came up the hall with a stick, and his left leg was stiff, and it swung a little wide. "I do most sincerely beg everybody's pardon," said the gentleman in the traveling coat. His voice was quiet and beautifully produced, and it went to the end of the room without any apparent effort. "The drift on Kirkby Bank is 4 feet deep, and we have been out of the chaise twice. Is Sperrin. I am a director of the North of England Mineral and Trust Company, and I am extremely sorry to arrive in the middle of what appears to be a scene." Nobody said anything at all. Mr. Sperrin took off his gloves. "May I ask," he said, "who this gentleman is?" He was looking at the Earl of Thornley. "I have said who I am," said the Earl. "So I gathered from the hall, and I am told the servants have been calling you Shaw since October." Sperrin turned, without hurry, to the elderly man beside him. "Mr. Pike, you have been the solicitor to this estate for how long?" 19 years, said the elderly man, unhappily. "And you have had the conduct of the succession since the late Earl's death in March. You corresponded with the War Office. You obtained the regimental returns and the hospital muster from Scutari. You satisfied yourself as to the identity of the heir in August of last year, and you attended him before the court in the matter of the disentailing assurance, and you saw him execute it. Is that so?" "It is so." "Then perhaps you would be good enough," said Mr. Sperrin gently, "to say good evening to your client." And Mr. Ansel Pike of Lincoln's Inn turned to the tall man with the stick and bowed, and said, "Good evening, my lord." It went through the hall like the sound after lightning. Somebody at the back said, "Oh," out loud. Rosamond Barrowcliff sat down on the bottom step of the staircase without appearing to know she had done it. Clara looked at the man on the stairs, at her man, at Nat Shaw, at the Earl of Thornley, and saw his face. And it was not the face of somebody who has been surprised. It was the face of a man who has been waiting a long while for a door to open, and has now heard it, and finds that it is worse than he had allowed for. "I see," he said. "I am glad your lordship's namesake takes it calmly." Sperrin handed his gloves to nobody in particular, and a footman took them out of the air. "It is a hard case, and I have some sympathy with it. A man comes back from that war with his face broken and his papers gone, and by degrees he stops distinguishing between what happened to him and what happened to somebody else. It is not always dishonest. It is nearly always incurable." He turned then, and looked for the first time at Clara Underhill, and smiled at her with real kindness. "And this is the young person with the paper," he said. "My dear, may I ask you a question or two?" "You need not answer if you would rather not." Clara said nothing. "Those figures in your hand, you wrote them yourself?" "Yes, tonight." "From the estate books, which are kept locked in the office in the North Passage, of which there are 2 keys, one held by Mrs. Barrowcliff and one by Mr. Culshaw?" Clara's mouth had gone entirely dry. "Yes," she said. "Alone, in the dark, during the ball." Sperrin nodded slowly, as though she had explained something that had been troubling him. "You are a servant in this house. Sunday last I am given to understand you were searched in the housekeeper's room, and a necklace belonging to Miss Selina Barrowcliff was found in your apron pocket in front of 4 witnesses. This evening, some 40 minutes ago, in this hall, in front of 100 people, your mistress struck you. Is any part of that untrue?" "No," said Clara, "but—" "I am sure there is a but, and I am sure it is a good one. and I am afraid it will have to be said to a jury." Sperron's voice did not harden in the least. That was the horrible part. "Because what you are holding, my dear, is not evidence. It is a document written by a dismissed servant of bad character, at night, in a locked room she had no right to be in, purporting to reproduce accounts that nobody present has seen. Anywhere in England that is called forgery, and uttering it is a felony." He looked round the hall, mildly. "I would very much rather this were dealt with kindly, but I am bound to say that if that paper is put before the magistrate tonight, the company will lay an information, and it will not be against Mrs. Barrowcliff." The fire spat. Clara stood in the middle of the great hall of Thornley, with the whole of the North Riding looking at her, and the folded paper in Sir Roger Havelock's hand had stopped being a weapon somewhere in the last 30 seconds, and had become quietly and completely a rope. Chapter 21. It took Sir Roger Havelock 11 minutes to clear the hall, and he did it, in the end, by simply telling the county to go home. They went slowly, and they went talking, standing about in the porch in furs, with the particular greed of persons who have got 3 months of conversation in one evening. Somebody laughed on the steps, and the sound came back into the hall off the snow. Sir Roger was a magistrate of 30 years' standing, and had the sense to know the exact limits of what he was. He stood in front of the fire, with his hands behind him, and gave his ruling to a room of about 15 people. Nobody would be taken into custody that night, on either side. Who was the Earl of Thornley was not a question for a magistrate in his own drawing-room. It was a question of title to land, and it would go to the assizes at York at the Spring Commission. He would take depositions in the morning. The estate papers would be sealed in the office, and the key would go into his own pocket, and Mr. Colshaw and Mrs. Barrowcliff would both enter into recognizances not to leave the parish. "And that," he said, "is the whole of what I can do, and I am aware that it is not enough." He looked at the man in black by the staircase. "You'll not sleep here tonight, sir, whoever you are. I'm sorry for it, but I'll not have 2 of you under one roof in the county talking, and I've a duty to the estate until the thing's decided." He hesitated. "The bay horse at Leyburn is decent." "I know it," said the man in black. "There's one more thing you'd best hear from me, and not from him." Sir Roger jerked his chin at the door through which Mr. Sperron had gone out 15 minutes before, unhurried, having said good night to everybody with great civility. "I've sealed the papers in that office, and I can hold this house till the assizes. I cannot touch a deed enrolled in Chancery and a mortgage lying in a strong box in the City of London. That falls due on the 25th of March, and it will fall due whoever you turn out to be. And if it is not paid on that day, the company takes the minerals and 900 acres of moor with them, and no court in England will get them back." "I know that, too," said the man in black. "Aye," said Sir Roger. "I thought you might." They took him out through the great door at about 6:30. He went between 2 of the magistrate's men, not help, and stopped once at the foot of the steps to get the leg down onto the snow, and in that pause he turned and looked back into the hall. Clara was standing where she had stood for an hour, against the wall by the passage door with her cap in her hand. They looked at each other the whole length of the hall, over the broken glass, past Rosamond on the bottom stair, and Mr. Pike gathering his papers, and the footman beginning, uselessly, to sweep. It went on for perhaps 40 seconds. There was a great deal to say, and no way to say any of it in a room with 15 people in it. And so neither of them said anything at all. She did not nod. He did not raise his hand. Then one of the men said something to him, and he turned and went down into the dark, and the door was shut. They came for her at 7. Bargater did it, and rather enjoyed himself, and Clara did not resist, because there was nothing to resist with. Her 4 sheets of pencil had gone into Sir Roger's pocketbook. The letter book of 1856 was still under the loose board by the chimney, and nobody in the world knew it was there. They put her in her own room and turned the key on the outside, and she sat on the edge of the bed in the dark with her shawl round her and listened to the house empty itself, the last carriage on the gravel, the doors, the servants going up, the whole cold place settling onto its foundations for the night. She thought, "He lied to me every morning for 8 weeks." She thought, "He is not lying now, and there is nobody in England who will believe him." And somewhere towards 3 in the morning, when the snow had stopped and the moon had come out over the moor and laid a hard blue light across the floorboards, Clara Underhill got up off the bed and prized up the board by the chimney and took out the letter book of 1856 and sat down under the window where the light was and began to read. Chapter 22. The room at the Bay Horse was over the archway, and it had a bed, a chair, a jug, and a window that rattled. Nicholas Ferrars sat in the chair, with his coat still on and his leg out straight, and did the arithmetic. 77 days to Lady Day, 65 to the Spring Commission at York, give or take the roads. £4 11 shillings in his pocket, which was every penny he had in the world, because the pay of a groom is £9 a year, and the pay of a major on half-pay is nothing at all when the War Office has you down as dead. 77 days, £4 11, and a bad leg. He remembered nothing whatever of his first 11 days at Scutari, and had it on the authority of an orderly that he had talked a great deal during them, chiefly to his uncle. When he came up out of it, his own name had been written on a board and rubbed off again, because the returns had gone in from before Sevastopol on the 9th, missing, believed killed, being one of 150 for that morning. 2 men had dug him out of the wall. One had been killed a fortnight later, and the other was in Bombay. He had lain there 6 weeks, and nobody had once called him by his own name, because there was nothing on him to say what it was. His commission, his letters, his uncle's ring, the pocketbook with his mother's hair in it, all of it had gone with his coat into the hands of whoever had the keeping of such things. That was the joke, and it had taken him 14 months to see it. He had spent all that time thinking of himself as a man who had been unlucky. Not once had it occurred to him that he had been chosen. He had come home in August and gone straight to Lincoln's Inn to tell an old man that his uncle's estate had an owner, and had been kept waiting 40 minutes, and had then been told kindly by a clerk of 23 that the Thornley succession had been settled in that room a fortnight since, and that, if he had a claim, he had best put it in writing. He had put it in writing. In October he had had the answer, and had burned it in a lantern in a hayloft. It said in substance, "The Earl has presented his commission, his letters, his uncle's ring, and a hand which the late Earl's own correspondence confirms. He has been recognized, and you would be well advised to be careful. There was no claim in England harder to prove than being who you say you are." So he had done the only thing left, gone north on foot without money, and walked into his own stable yard and asked for work. A groom can stand in a corner for 10 weeks and count what goes out of a house, and a claimant cannot. And whatever was being done at Thornley would be written down somewhere, because men who steal in an orderly fashion cannot help writing things down. He had allowed himself 6 weeks. By the 2nd week of December, he had the shape of the thing entire, and every fact he was ever going to get from outside that locked office door. He had stayed until the 6th of January, 4 weeks. He had not spent them gathering anything. He had spent them going down into a cold stable at 10 minutes to 5 to be handed a tin cup by a girl in a gray gown who thought he was the poorest creature in the house and could not bear that nobody had ever been kind to him, and he had drunk. it every morning and said nothing. And when they burned her father's papers, because of 11 lumps of coal he had put in her scuttle, he had sat on a corn bin and looked at the floor and let her believe it was somebody else's kindness that had done it. He had told himself at the time that he was protecting the investigation. He had been protecting the tea. Towards 5, the sky over the roofs began to go from black to the color of a bruise, and Nicholas found that of everything in front of him, the assizes, Sperrin, the 25th of March, the tall man with the stick who had his uncle's ring on his finger, the thing he could not put his mind against, was smaller than any of them, and entirely his own fault. He did not know whether she would ever speak to him again. He discovered, sitting there, that he was more afraid of that than of the trial, and he had the grace to be disgusted with himself about it, and it did not make the least difference. Chapter 23. Lady Havelock came for her at 9 in the morning. She came in her own carriage, went up the attic stairs at 54 years of age, without pausing, told Pargeter to unlock the door and then to go away, and stood looking round the room once the bare boards, the wash jug with ice on it, the girl sitting on the bed in yesterday's gray gown. "Right," she said. "Fetch your box." "Ma'am, I don't think I'm allowed." "Sir Roger has taken your deposition, has he not? Then you are a witness, not a prisoner. And a witness who is kept locked in an attic by one of the parties is a scandal, which I have just explained to Mrs. Barrowcliff at some length." Lady Havelock had a face like a good horse and the manner of a woman who has been managing a large household since she was 22. "Besides, I want you. My husband tells me your father was Underhill, who did the Ravensett levels. I have 400 acres of clay at Marski that has drowned every February since the flood, and 3 men have told me 3 different lies about it. You will look at it and tell me the truth, and I shall pay you for it. Fetch your box." Clara fetched her box. He came the following afternoon. She was in the little south room at Marsk that Lady Havelock had given her, with her father's 3 sheets, and the letter book of 1,856 on the table in front of her, and the maid came up and said that a gentleman had called and was in the morning room. And Clara went down, and with her chin up and her hands perfectly steady, and got as far as the middle of the carpet, before it all came apart. "You lied to me." She had not meant it to be the first thing. It was the only thing. "Yes," said Nicholas Ferrars, "I did." Every morning her voice was rising, and she could hear it and could not stop it. For 8 weeks. I sat on that bench and told you every single thing there was to know about me, that I had 4 shillings, that I had nobody, that I was being sent to Whitby, that I did as I was told because a girl with nobody does as she's told. I told you about my mother. I told you what my father said about the hill. She was shaking. And you sat there in your dead uncle's stable and drank my tea and let me be sorry for you. I know. Do you know what it was like standing in that hall? To find out that the one person in this house, who her voice went and she dragged it back, that I had been a feature, that I was the interesting thing in the stable yard, the great man in disguise, seeing how the little creatures behave when they think nobody important is looking. No. He came a step forward quickly and stopped himself. "No, not you. Then there's the second thing, and it's worse, so don't answer the first one yet." Clara put her hands behind her back. "You knew. You knew in November that I was to be sent away in January. You saw the coal and the cup and the necklace. You saw my father's papers go into that range. You were there, and you could have stopped the whole of it with 1 sentence on any morning you liked. And what you said to me instead was wait until the 13th. Say why." "Because on any morning I liked," said Nicholas, "I could have walked into that house and said I am the Earl of Thornley, and by 4 o'clock that afternoon Sperrin would have known that the man he had made into an earl had a competitor standing in a stable yard in Yorkshire with no money, no papers, no witnesses, and a lock he could not open. and I would have been arrested for what I was arrested for last night, except 3 months earlier, with nothing whatever in my hands. And you would have gone to Whitby anyway, on the 8th of January, in the same cart. And there would have been nobody left here at all. He said it flatly. That is the true answer, and it is also a convenient one, which is why I would rather you had the third thing as well. The third thing. You had better say it yourself. You'll do it better. Clara looked at him. You used me, she said. The room was very quiet. You did not need my kindness, she said. You needed somebody who could read a survey book and get into a house you couldn't get into. And you found it. And it happened to be a girl who brought you tea, so you let her go on bringing it. Because a servant, who is treated as a friend, will put her hand into a locked office at midnight, and a servant who is given an order will not. Yes, said Nicholas Ferrars. Clara had expected the other thing, the explaining. It was not like that, and had been braced against it with everything she had, and it did not come. Say it properly, she said. I used you. He stood in the middle of Lady Havelock's morning room, with his hat in his hand, and did not look away. I knew what I was doing while I was doing it, and I did it anyway, and it is the meanest thing I have ever done in my life, and I have done things at Sevastopol that I will not tell you about. I could have asked you, honestly, in November, on the second morning, and told you who I was and what I wanted, and let you decide with your eyes open like a grown woman. I did not. I told myself it was to protect you from knowing. That was a lie. It was because the moment I told you, the mornings would stop because you would be talking to the Earl of Thornley, and I would never again in my life have somebody hand me a cup of tea for no reason, but that they did not like to think of a man being cold. He turned his hat once in his hands.
I needed 6 weeks, he said.
I stayed 10. Clara stood absolutely still. Get out, she said.
Clara, I said get out. I am going to help you, because there are 31 families on that estate and because I will not have my father's name on that paper.
And because I would rather be governed by you than by a man who paid £160 for a necklace worth of my character in front of 200 people. Her voice was perfectly level now, which frightened her rather more than the shaking had. But you are not to think it is for you. It is not going to be for you for a long time. Now go away and send me everything you have got, and do not come here again until I send for you. He went. Clara stood in the middle of the carpet for some minutes after the door shut. Then she went upstairs and washed her face, and came down and asked Lady Havelock for paper, pens, ink, and the loan of a gig. Chapter 24. She had 9 weeks, and she spent them the way her father had taught her to spend a season, finding out what was true and writing it down in a form somebody else could check. She found Thomas Headley on the second Friday in Leyburn Market, behind a trestle of winter greens, in a coat that had been a good one in 1849. When Clara told him what she wanted, he put both hands flat on the trestle and looked at the cabbages a while. They'll say I'm a discharged servant with a grudge, he said. They will. Well, I've been called worse by better. Come round the back, lass, and bring your ink. She had 4 pages from him. The South Wood, and who had come to look at it in August. The 2 orders to raise the rents and their dates, and the exact form of words in which he had been dismissed. He signed it, made her read it back twice, then sold her a cabbage for a penny, and would not take 2pence. She found Dinah Skelton at her sister's cottage at Bedale at 11, and did not leave until dark. I knew, said Mrs. Skelton, at about 2 o'clock, with her hands round a cup. That's what you've come for, so I'll say it and have it over. I knew on the 9th of November. Clara put down her pen. He'd been here a fortnight, and I'd not been near the stables. Then I went down about the pig, and I was stood in the arch, and he brought the roan mare out of the far stall. He came at her from the right. And when she put her ears back, he put his hand flat on her nose and said, "Give over, you're your mother all through." Her mother, said Clara, Thistle. She was a devil off the near side, and every foal she threw was the same. And there's been 2 people in 5 and 20 years knew how to handle that line, Wilf Tarn. And the boy that broke Thistle in the summer of '43 when he was 17 and had his arm in a sling, a fortnight after. Mrs. Skelton looked at her steadily. I dusted round that boy's bedroom for 11 years after he went. There's nowt wrong with my eyes. And you said nothing. I'm 58, with no husband, no place, and no character. If I'd opened my mouth in November, I'd have been on the road in November instead of December. And there'd be one more mad old woman in Bedale telling folk the groom was an earl, her mouth twisted. I'll say it in a court, though, in front of the judge and Mr. Sperrin and the whole of York, and I'll enjoy it. Clara wrote it down and went home and did the work she was actually good at. The mineral notebook covered the Ravenset workings from 1,846 to 1,849, the depth of each shaft, the thickness of the vein at every level, the assay of the ore, and in her father's small, dry hand, at the foot of the last page, the conclusion he had been paid to draw and had drawn without decoration, the vein pinches to nothing 40 eds of the boundary. Nothing here worth a new engine. The valuation of July 1,856 gave the same 4 shafts and the same levels, and made the vein 11 times thicker. She set it out in parallel columns, the true figure and the false side by side with the source of each, and added 1 line of her own at the foot. The Ravenset shafts were capped, and the adit walled up in the spring of 1,851. By order of the late Earl on the recommendation of Mr. Headley. Any person who had walked over that hill since 1,851 must have seen it. Then she wrote 3 letters. The first went to the Registrar of Joint Stock Companies, enclosing a fee, requesting an office copy of the memorandum, the shareholders, and the return of officers of the North of England Mineral and Trust Company, Limited, because the Act of 1,856 had made such things public, and because it had evidently not occurred to anybody that a servant girl in the North Riding would send 4 shillings to London to look. The second went to the editor of a penny paper in Leeds, and Clara took a long time over it and hated every word. The third she did not send. It was to Nicholas Ferrers at the Bay Horse, and it was 1 line. What is the name of the man at Scutari? And she tore it up, and a week later wrote it again and sent it. In the evenings, by candle, she read the letter book of 1,856. It held the last 11 weeks of an old man's correspondence, letters to his wine merchant, to the ecclesiastical commissioners, to a man in North Allerton about a dog. Clara read everyone slowly because they were his voice, and there was nobody else left alive who could hear it. On the 18th of February she found what was in them. The letter was dated the 9th of February, 1,856, 5 weeks before he died. It was written to a Colonel Marchant, who had evidently been at school with him, and it was 2 pages long and mostly about drainage. And on the second page, without any warning at all, the old man said this: "You will tell me I am a fool, and I dare say I am. But I have had 11 years of it now, and I am 71, and I find I mind it a great deal more than I expected to. If you should hear anything at all of him through the Horse Guards, I beg you will write to me by return. I do not want an apology. I want to know whether he is alive. He will be 31 in November. He was always a little deaf on the left, even as a boy, so that one had to walk round him in the garden to be heard, and I never once did it, which I have thought about a good deal lately. And there is the hand. He broke the little finger of the left hand off a pony when he was 11 and would not have it seen to, and it's set crooked as a hook. And he used to hide it in his cuff at dinner, and I used to make him show it. And God forgive me, I thought it was funny." Clara sat with her hand over her mouth. She read it again, then copied it out in full with the date and the page, and sat looking at what she had written for a long time. "He will be 31 in November, not 35." She had thought 35 because of the scar and the leg and the way he stood up out of a chair. And because a man who has been dug out of a wall does not look his age, and she had believed her own eyes for 8 weeks over a fact written down in a dead man's letter book. She put her head in her hands and discovered, with some annoyance, that she was crying about it. She sent for him on the 20th, and he came in an hour and a half, on a hired horse, in the rain. "I have the name," he said before she could speak. He was wet through. "Kilbride's at Richmond Barracks. He came round out of hospital in '56 and re-enlisted, and I found him on Tuesday, and he knew me in about a second and a half, which was more than I expected. He can't help us on his own. The moment he opens his mouth, Sperrin will say, 'I've bought a sergeant for £5, and he'll be right that it looks like it.'" Nicholas put his hat down. "But he was in that ward, and he says the man who had the keeping of my things for 11 days and read out my letters to me when I was too far gone to know it was the commissariat sergeant at that end of the hospital. A Cornishman, educated, a lawyer's son who'd been a clerk in the county court at Bodmin and gone bankrupt." "Name," said Clara. "Owen Tregarth." Clara wrote it in the middle of a clean sheet of paper and looked at it. "Now," she said, "I shall tell you what I have got." Chapter 25. At Thornley, in February, Mrs. Augusta Barrowcliff went on counting the candles. There was no reason to. The office was sealed. The estate was in the hands of the court, and a bailiff's clerk came up twice a week from Northallerton, looked at things, and went away again. But she went into the chandlery on Saturday evening with the slate, as she had done for 44 weeks, and counted, and wrote the figure down, because the alternative was to sit in the small parlor with her hands in her lap. Rosamond was embroidering handkerchiefs. They were for Mr. Sperrin, and she had asked her mother twice whether the monogram ought to have the S first or the V, and Augusta had answered both times without argument, because a person who wants very badly to believe a thing will get there in the end, whatever anybody says. Selina had stopped eating properly and had taken to walking. She went out at 11 in any weather and came back at 3, and did not say where she had been, and looked at her mother across the dinner table with an expression Augusta had last seen on her own face, in a glass at 19. Augusta did the arithmetic. She had been doing it every night since the 7th of January, and it came out the same way each time, and she went through it again in February the way one goes on pressing a tooth. There were 2 possible endings, and they were the same ending. If the tall man was the Earl, the mortgage fell in, the company took the moor, and Mr. Sperrin, being a director and a gentleman, and a man who had never signed anything, went home to Threadneedle Street. And the person who had lived in the house and signed for the wine and initialed the rent roll for 10 months had a name in a criminal court, and it was not witness. If the man with the scar was the Earl, the deed of August was waste paper. The company had been swindling the public since March, and the men who had done it would go before a jury, and she would go there with them. That was the arithmetic. In 11 months of being frightened, it had not once occurred to her until the middle of January that Von Sperrin had never at any point intended her to end anywhere else. There was a third ending, and she had it in the bottom of her work-basket under the linings. She had begun it in April, in her second week at Thornley, out of the same instinct that had made her look at Josiah's books before she married him, a plain quarto notebook, and in it, in her own small hand, every letter received and its date, every sum paid out and to whom. In September, when the Royal British Bank went down and the letters from London changed their tone, she had begun copying more. And underneath the notebook, there was an envelope. And in the envelope, there was something she had taken out of a japanned iron box in a dead man's bedroom, 11 days after his funeral, and had read once, and had never shown to a living soul. She could put both of them into the hands of a magistrate tomorrow morning. It would end Sperrin, and probably the company, and certainly the 25th of March. It would also prove beyond doubt that Augusta Barrowcliff had known exactly what was being done at Thornley since the second week of April, and had gone on receiving the county and initialing the rent roll for 10 months with the knowledge in her pocket. 7 years, she thought. 10 if the judge disliked her, and judges did dislike her. She had noticed it all her life. She put the slate back on its nail and went upstairs. Rosamond was asleep. Selina's door was shut, and there was no light under it, which meant nothing at all, since Selina had been sitting in the dark for a fortnight. Augusta Barrowcliff stood on the landing with a candle in her hand and made the decision she had been making every night for 5 weeks. She would say nothing. She would go into that court in March and say nothing, and be believed or not believed, and take what came. And if Selina came to her tomorrow and asked what was in the work basket, she would look her in the face and lie. She had lied about a great deal larger things than that, and had never yet found it difficult. Chapter 26. Selina Barrowcliff came to Marske on the last day of February, on foot, 6 miles, in a hooded cloak, and would not come in past the hall. "I'm not staying," she said, "and I'm not apologizing, so you needn't get ready to be gracious about it." "I hadn't got ready," said Clara. "Good." Selina put back the hood. She had got thin, and it did not suit her. She had the sort of face that needed feeding. "My mother has not slept since the 7th of January. She goes up at 10, and she is on the landing at 3. Rosamond is embroidering handkerchiefs with a monogram on them for a man who will be in the dock at the Old Bailey before Michaelmas, and she has asked me twice whether the blue silk is too dark. My mother counted the candles on Saturday, and there is nobody to count them for." She looked at the wall over Clara's shoulder. "There is one person in that house who can see the bottom of it, and it is me, and I have never been the clever one, and I find I do not care for the promotion." "Sit down." "No," a pause. "Thank you." Clara waited. "I want to ask you something," Selina said, "and then I want to go. And I would take it kindly if you did not say anything encouraging to me, because I shall bolt. All right? Do you know what my mother keeps in her work basket?" The hall clock went on ticking.
"No," said Clara. "I do." Selina Barrowcliff's chin came up.
"I have known since the first week of January. I went through it while she was at church, because I have not got a single scruple in my body, and I wanted to know how bad it was." Her mouth pulled sideways. "It is worse and better than I thought, both at once. And I have been walking about the moor for 6 weeks with it, and I have not decided." Clara did not move a muscle of her face, and afterwards she thought it the single most difficult thing she had ever done. She wanted to say, "Tell me what it is." She wanted to say it so badly her jaw ached. What she said was, "Then I shan't ask you what it is." Selina's eyes came round fast. "But I'll tell you the 2 things you have not got, because you are 20, and there is nobody in that house to tell you, and it isn't kindness. It is arithmetic, and your mother taught it to me herself." Clara counted them off. 1. If she goes into that court and says nothing, and it comes out afterwards, and it will come out, because Mr. Sperrin's clerks have kept books too, and one of them will sell them, then she is a woman who sat silent to save herself. And there is no judge in England who will give her anything for that. 2. If she stands up on her own feet before anybody makes her, and puts what she has in front of the court, then she is a woman who came forward, and it goes on the record, and it is worth years. Not freedom, years. Years, said Selina. I will not tell you it is nothing. It is not nothing. She will go to prison either way, and I am not going to stand in this hall and pretend otherwise to make you feel better. No, said Selina slowly. No, you wouldn't. And the third thing is not arithmetic, so you may do as you like with it. Clara's voice was not quite steady. Whatever she does in that court, she will be doing it in front of you. That is the only part of this she still gets to choose. Selina Barrowcliff stood there a long moment, then put up her hood. You are a very cold sort of person, Underhill, she said, and I dislike you extremely, and I always shall. Yes, said Clara. I have not decided anything, I know. She opened the door herself and went out into the wet, and was 50 yards down the drive before Clara realized that she had walked 6 miles in February to ask a question she already knew the answer to, and would have to walk 6 miles back. Chapter 27. They came into York on the 11th of March and took rooms in Micklegate, and at 2 in the morning Clara was in the kitchen because she could not sleep, and at 2:10 Nicholas Ferrars came down because he had heard the kettle. Neither of them said anything about it. She made the tea. There was a cupboard of china in that house, and she took down 2 cups and then put one back and got the tin cup out of her workbox, where it had been since the 6th of January, and set it on the table between them. You kept it. I stole it, said Clara. You were in jail at the time, in a manner of speaking, and it seemed a pity to leave it in the loft for Pargeter. He turned it round with one finger and did not pick it up. They went through the case for the last time. The office copy from the registrar had come on Saturday. The company registered on the 4th of March 1,856, 7 subscribers, 4 of them at the same address, and 211 shareholders, mostly for 3 or 4 shares. Halifax Bradford and Huddersfield Drapers, a schoolmaster, 2 clergymen, a great many widows. Clara had read that list twice and could not read it a third time. The return of officers gave 3 directors. One was Von Sperrin. None was Tregarth. He'll not be on paper anywhere, said Nicholas. He isn't a director. He's the goods. They don't put the goods in the return. Then it comes to Kilbride. And Kilbride is a sergeant who was in that ward and can swear he saw Tregarth with my pocketbook in his hands. And the moment he says, so their man asks him how much he has been paid and how long he served under me and whether he is fond of me, and the jury watches him say very. Nicholas rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. It is not nothing. It is not enough. And the photograph? Sir Roger's man wired on Monday and again on Tuesday. Fenton's people have it, officers of the 2nd Division taken in front of Sevastopol in May of '55. And I am in it, and my hand is on my sword. If it comes by the noon train on Thursday, it comes. If not, it does not. The fire settled. Clara pushed the tin cup across the table an inch, and Nicholas picked it up. I want to tell you something, he said, and then I shall not raise it again. Because tomorrow you have to stand up in a court, and I will not have you doing it with this in your head. Then don't tell me tonight. I would rather say it while I have still got the chance. There is a real possibility that I lose on Thursday. He turned the cup in his hands. At Sevastopol, they sent us at a place called the Great Redan, and it was a bad business, and it was known to be a bad business before we went. And we went. The wall came down on the 3rd day. When I came up, I was in Scutari, and I did not know my own name for 11 days. And for 6 weeks after that, nobody in that building called me by it, because there was nothing on me to say what it was. Clara sat still. I came out of that place and got home and found that a man had picked my name up off the floor where I dropped it and was walking about in it. And then I came north and stood in a stable yard, and at 5:10 on the 4th of November, a girl I had never seen before came across a frozen yard and gave me a cup of tea, because she thought I was the lowest creature in the house and could not bear that nobody had been kind to me. You gave that to a man you believed could never repay you a farthing." He set the cup down. "I have been flattered and courted and lied to since I was 9 years old by people who wanted my uncle's name. Nobody in my life has ever handed me anything for nothing. And I was so afraid of losing it that I let it cost you your father's papers and your character in front of 200 people. And I have told myself a dozen good reasons since, and not one of them is the reason. I was frightened. That is all it was. I sold your safety to buy 4 more weeks of the 1 hour in the day when somebody looked at me and saw a man instead of a title and a wound." He looked up. "Don't forgive me. I am not asking for that, and I don't think you should. And if you did, I would not know what to do with it. Only don't stop speaking to me." Clara did not answer. She sat and looked at the tin cup on the table between them. Then she reached out and took the teapot and filled it and turned it round and pushed it back across the table to him, handle first. Neither of them said anything else. They finished the pot, turn and turn about, as they had every morning for 8 weeks in a freezing stable, and at 3 o'clock she washed the cup and put it in her pocket and went up. Chapter 28. The Assizes Court at York on the 12th of March, 1857, was packed to the walls by 9 in the morning, and the reason was the penny press. The story had got out of Leyburn in the 2nd week of January and into Leeds by the 3rd, and from Leeds the stamp duty gone these 2 years, and a paper costing a penny it had gone over England in 6 days. The Earl in the stable. Clara had seen 4 versions of herself in print by February, none of them anybody she recognized, and had stopped reading them. It was tried as an action of ejectment, the plaintiff claiming to be seized of the Thornley estate, and wrongfully kept out of it, and the whole question of who he was going before a special jury. There were 3 counsel on the other side, and one on theirs, a young man from the Northern Circuit, whom Sir Roger Havelock was paying for out of his own pocket and had never once mentioned. They called the defendant first, and for 4 hours he was magnificent. Clara sat behind her own counsel and watched Owen Tregarth destroy them, courteously, in detail, from the box. He gave the passage out in 54, and the name of the transport, the cholera at Varna, the price of a fowl at Balaclava in December, the state of the road up from the harbor. He described the assault on the Reedon with a soldier's flat particularity, and the hospital at Scutari, the corridors, the smell, the 9 a day, and a woman at the back of the court put her handkerchief up. He was very good indeed, and the reason was that every word of it was true. He had been in that ward, at the end of that bed, for 11 days, and had read those letters. Their counsel got up and asked him some questions about a pony and a crooked finger, and Tregarth said, with great gentleness, that he had broken the little finger of his left hand as a boy, and that it had set imperfectly, and that he would be happy to show it to the jury. And he held it up, and it was slightly bent, in the way that a finger is slightly bent when a grown man has broken it on purpose against a door frame in the January of that year, and let it knit crooked. At 1:30 the judge said he would take 1 more witness before rising. They called Clara Underhill. Their young counsel had to make an argument that took 10 minutes, that she was called not as to character, nor as to identity, but as an expert in the survey and drainage of the Thornley estate, trained therein by her late father, and as the person best qualified in England to speak to the mineral valuation of July 1856. The judge, who was 70 and had been listening to the defendant's counsel for 4 hours, said that he had never heard of a female surveyor and supposed there was a first time for everything, and let her in. She went up in her mother's gray shawl with her father's 3 sheets under her arm. She unrolled the sheets slowly on the ledge of the box and asked for them to be handed to the jury after, And then she turned round and did not look at the defendant at all, and asked the court's leave to put 4 questions. They were allowed. The defendant's counsel let them be allowed, and Clara concluded long afterwards that he simply could not imagine what a servant girl could ask that would matter. "The beck that runs under the South Bridge at Thornley," said Clara. "Which way does it run, and what did it do in the summer of 1847? Tregarth looked at her. "He said that it ran south to the river, as becks in that country did, and that he had no particular recollection of 1847, having been abroad a good deal." "It runs northeast," said Clara, "against the fall of the ground, because it was turned in 1802 to drive the sawmill, and in the flood of August 47 it came back over the old course in the night and took the South Bridge out. And there is a new arch on the west side that anybody can see from the drive." Second question. "Of the low fields at Thornley, which one floods first in February, and why?" Tregarth said that he could not undertake to say which field flooded first. Netherbeck. "It floods in the first week of February, in 8 years out of 10, because there is a run of tile drain under it, laid in 48, with a fall of 1 foot in 80 yards, which is not enough. And my father wrote that down at the time, and it is in front of the jury now." Third question. "There are 4 shafts and 1 adit on Ravenset Hill. The adit was walled up. In what year and on whose order?" There was this time a considerable pause. The defendant said he understood the workings had been closed at some period before his majority, and could not put a year to it. 1851, said Clara, by order of the late Earl, on the recommendation of Mr. Thomas Headley, and the wall is 4 feet high and still there, and anybody who has walked that hill since 1851 has seen it, which is a matter of some interest, my lord, because the valuation on which £84,000 was advanced describes that adit as open and in work in July of last year. The judge put down his pen. Fourth question, said Clara. There is a roan mare in the end stall of the stable at Thornley. What is her name? What was her mother's name? And who broke her mother? Somebody in the gallery laughed. It stopped almost at once. Owen Tregarth sat in the box and said nothing for 4 seconds, and then said that he did not concern himself with the stable. They put the plaintiff up after the rising at 4 o'clock, and there counsel him the same 4 questions in the same order. He gave the beck, and the turning of it in 1802, and the flood, and the new arch on the west side. He gave Netherbeck, and the fall of a foot in 80 yards, and added that he had told his uncle in 1844 that it wanted relaying, and had been shouted at for it. He gave 1851, and Headley, and the height of the wall, and said that he had helped to carry the stone. Then they asked him the 4th question, and the Earl of Thornley said, the mare in the end stall is Bramble. Her mother was Thistle, and I broke her in the summer of 43, when I was 17, and I had my arm in a sling for a fortnight afterwards, because she goes for you off the near side, as every foal of that line has done for 25 years. He paused. You have to come at her from the right. I never minded it. I am deaf on the left myself, so we understood one another. There was a sound in that courtroom that was not laughter and not anything else with a name, and then there was no sound at all. Chapter 29. Mr. Sperrin's leading counsel rose at 10 on the 2nd morning and was extremely good. Local knowledge, he said, is learned. A man may learn a beck in an afternoon and a wall in 10 minutes. The plaintiff had lived 10 weeks at Thornley under a false name with the freedom of the stables and the run of the parish, and if he had spent them learning by heart the answers to the very questions his friends now put to him, it would be no more than a competent impostor would do. As to the young person who had asked them, and he was very sorry to have to say it, the court would perhaps bear in mind that Miss Underhill had been searched for a necklace in January, had entered a locked office at night, and had a private connection with the plaintiff of a character which he would not describe further than to say that it was well known in the parish of my lord. The voice came from the third bench at the back of the court, and it was not loud, and it was perfectly steady. Mrs. Augusta Barrowcliff stood up in her third black gown with her bonnet strings tied and a plain quarto notebook and a sealed envelope in her hands. My lord, I am the person who has been living in that house. I should like to give evidence, and I am aware of what it will cost me, and I have had 11 months to consider it. The uproar took 4 minutes to put down. They swore her at 11. She stood in the box, very small and very upright, and she did not look once at the counsel who tried to stop her, nor at Mr. Sparron, who sat with his hands folded on the head of his stick and his pleasant, closed face entirely unchanged. She produced the notebook first. It ran from the 19th of April, 1856 to the 4th of March, 1857, and it was, as the judge observed afterwards, the most complete piece of bookkeeping ever put before him by a person testifying against herself. Every letter from Threadneedle Street, with its date and substance, every instruction, every sum paid out of the estate and where it had gone, the 11 bills of the late Josiah Barrowcliff, by date, amount, and holder, and, on the page for the 12th of September 1856, the quarterly salary list of the North of England Mineral and Trust Company, Limited, copied out of a letter she had been sent in error and had never been asked to return, in which, between a clerk at £60 and an office porter at 30, there stood the entry, O. Tregarth, nominal representative, 200 PA. Clara heard her own voice say something, and Lady Havelock's hand closed hard on her wrist. Mrs. Barrowcliff, said the judge, when it had been read, you understand that you have now sworn to facts which make you a party to this. I do, my lord. Why have you done it? Augusta Barrowcliff looked straight in front of her. My younger daughter is 20, my lord, she said. I would rather she had a mother in penal servitude than a mother who taught her this trade. Then she gave them the envelope. The late Earl of Thornley sent for his solicitor at 10 o'clock at night on the 2nd of March, 1856, a fortnight before he died. Mr. Pike is in this court and knows what he drew that night, and knows that it was executed, and knows that he never saw it again, because the original was left with his lordship, and his lordship kept it in an iron box in his bedroom, and the box was not there after the funeral. She put the envelope on the ledge. I took it out of the box on the 27th of March. I burned the box. I have had this in the lining of my work-basket for 11 months. Mr. Ansel Pike came up from the well of the court with his hands shaking so badly that the usher had to hold the paper for him, and said, in a voice that cracked on the second word, that it was the codicil he had prepared and attested on the 2nd of March, and that he had asked for it 4 times and been told there was no such box. It disposed of the only land at Thornley that was not settled home farm, and the 140 acres the old man had bought out of his own pocket in 1839, and left the whole of it, with an annuity of £200 charged upon the residue, to Clara Underhill, spinster, whom I ought to have provided for years ago and did not, out of a foolish notion that there would be time. The judge asked why she had concealed it. Because if that girl had 200 a year, said Augusta Barrowcliff, she would have gone. And if she had gone, there would have been nobody left in that house who had ever seen it run properly, and no one to look at me and know the difference. The noon train from London came in at 12:10. Sir Roger Havelock's man brought it up in a flat leather case and was handed in at 20 to 1, a photographic print, mounted on card, taken by Mr. Roger Fenton in front of Sevastopol in May 1855, and published in London that autumn among 100 others, 11 officers of the 2nd Division in front of a bell tent, in the sun, blurred where somebody had moved. The 4th man from the left was standing with his weight on his right leg and his left hand resting on the hilt of his sword. His face was unmarked. He was 29 years old, and he had 11 weeks to live before a wall came down on him. The little finger of his left hand was bent inward from the 2nd joint and lay across the hilt like a hook. Their counsel had it put in the jury's hands together, with a fair copy of a letter written on the 9th of February 1856 by an old man in Yorkshire to a school friend, in which he described his nephew, whom he had not seen for 11 years, as deaf on the left and crooked in that same finger, and said that he had thought it funny at the time, and did not now. Then the judge asked the 2 men in that court to stand up and put out their left hands. Afterwards, Clara could never remember the verdict, only the sound of it coming up off the floor of the court like a wave, and Selina Barrowcliff at the back with both hands over her face. Mr. Von Sperrin was committed to the Central Criminal Court, the business having been transacted in the City of London, and was convicted in July of conspiracy to defraud and got 14 years. The company was wound up in May. Its 211 shareholders received 4 shillings and 7 pence in the pound, and nothing Clara Underhill ever did in the whole of her life brought them another farthing, and she did not pretend otherwise. Owen Tregorth got 7 years penal servitude. Ephraim Culshaw got 2. The Earl of Thornley having gone into the box on his behalf with 11 letters concerning a bill for £300 signed at Northallerton by a bank clerk of 22, and Jem Culshaw lost his place, and did not go to prison, and went out to Canada in the autumn. Augusta Barrowcliff pleaded guilty and got 7 years, the recorder observing that, but for her own act in coming forward, it would have been a great deal more. Clara did not go to the sentencing. Rosamond went back to Leeds and was not heard of again. Selina stayed in Yorkshire, and 3 years later opened a small school for girls at Leyburn, and it was not forgiveness that made Clara sign the first check for it, and both of them knew it perfectly well. He asked her in April, in the estate office, with the seals off the door and the windows open. He gave her the books first. The whole of the estate accounts, the rentals, the wages, the drainage, and the timber, at £120 a year, written in figures on a sheet of paper, because he said he was not going to leave it to be understood, and he reminded her, before she had said anything at all, that she had home farm and 200 a year of her own, whatever she answered, and that the one had nothing to do with the other, and that she could take her land and go to Harrogate tomorrow and set up a surveyor's practice and be a nuisance to him across a boundary for 40 years. It was, she thought, the point of the whole thing. She could go. For the first time since she was 14, she could actually go, and he had made quite sure she knew it before he opened his mouth about anything else. Then he asked her. He did it standing, because the knee would not do the other thing, and they would both have felt ridiculous. And he said that he was lame and scarred and bad-tempered and deaf on one side, that he would sooner spend an evening in a stable than a ballroom, and that every mother in 3 counties would now be throwing a daughter at his head, and they would all be exactly as clever and exactly as false as Sperrin had been. "I want the girl with the tin cup," he said. "I want to come in cold off the boundary and find you at that desk arguing with a ledger. Stay, Clara, not as my ward, not as my clerk, though be that as well if you like. Stay and fix my accounts and quarrel with me about the low fields, and make me buy a proper teapot. That is the whole of it. She made him wait 3 days. Then she said yes, and named her condition: that home farm and the 140 acres be settled to her separate use before the marriage and not fall into the estate. Since a married woman in England in 1857 owned nothing whatever, unless somebody had taken the trouble to arrange it in advance, and she had spent quite enough of her life depending on the goodwill of people who were fond of her. Nicholas Ferrars laughed until he had to sit down and sent for Mr. Pike that afternoon. They were married at the end of April in the parish church on a working day by the Reverend Simeon Blade, who had not said one word out of turn in the whole of the preceding year, and whose voice shook on the first line and then did not shake again. There were no London guests. Headley came, restored to his stewardship, and Wilftarn, restored to his stable. Dinah Skelton sat in the second pew in a new bonnet and cried steadily throughout. The tenants came straight up from lambing with the mud still on their boots and did not take their hats off until Blade looked at them. Clara did not wear white. She wore her mother's wedding gown, let out at the shoulder and taken in at the waist, because it was the only thing of hers she still had. On the 26th of June, the Queen gave away the first Victoria Crosses in Hyde Park to 62 men, and the name of Major Nicholas Ferrars was among them, having been put forward in 1856 and struck off again on the ground that he was dead. He hated every minute of it and had the tin cup in his coat pocket the whole time, which Clara did not discover until that evening. That same week, the news came from India, and Sergeant Dan Kilbride's regiment was under orders for Calcutta. Clara wrote to him every month for 2 years. A good many of those letters were never answered, and she went on writing them anyway. In the last week of June, on a Tuesday morning, she came down the back stairs at 10 minutes to 5 out of habit and went out into the kitchen yard. The cobbles were warm. Grass had come up between them in the wet spring, and nobody had troubled to pull it out. There was a blackbird going at it in the ivy on the north face, and beyond the wall the moor ran off eastward under a mist that was going to burn off by 7. On the sill outside the kitchen door there were 2 cups. One was thin white china painted with blue swallows, faded, the gilt gone off the rim, out of a dinner service she had once scrubbed the floor under. The other was tin, dented on one side, with the handle brazed back on by somebody who had not much cared how it looked, and a regimental number worn nearly smooth in the base. They had a house with 40 rooms and 11 services of china, and still shared the tin cup most mornings, because 10 weeks in a cold stable makes a stronger habit than 300 years of family. Clara poured out. Behind her, from the direction of the arch, came the uneven sound of a man crossing a yard, the good leg, and then the other one, coming down heavier on warm stone. She did not turn round. There are mornings when you do not need to.